Good evening. You are listening to Radio Free Magonia, the official podcast of the Magonian Research Group. As always, I am your host, Michael Parrish, and as is often the case, my partner, Tom Goodwin, could not be here because time zones. Tonight, we come full circle. If you know us, if you follow us, and you would know or you would remember that when we made our podcast debut, it was on this man's show. And if you don't really know us, then you probably know him. My guest tonight is the host of Where Did the Road Go? Seriah Azkath.
Hey.
Seriah, what's going on?
Oh, not much. I'm just now silencing my phone as I realized it was still not silenced.
That's okay.
So there we go.
You know, it's funny that we have you on tonight because during our last episode, we kept inadvertently plugging like podcasts that were bigger and more popular than ours, which is really a tactical error because the listener could hear that and think to themselves, "Oh shit, Monsters Among Us exists? Why am I listening to this? Yeah, I'm gone."
Well, I mean, all podcasts have some relevance, I think.
Yeah.
It depends what your taste is. Even the popular ones. I mean, the popular ones have the smoother edges, but take less chances,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know if we really take chances or not, but in Radio Free Magonia fashion, no banter, straight to the point.
All right.
Seriah, I would like to first ask you, your name is very uncommon. Is that your given name or a chosen name?
It was given to me, but not until I was like 19.
Okay.
That came out of a series of paranormal stuff that happened to me all in a row that sort of ended in a Kundalini awakening that literally changed me.
And what does the name mean?
That's a great question. It doesn't have a set meaning. The closest I found was something along the lines of Prince of the Lord.
Okay.
It didn't really exist in common culture when it was given to me. Since then, I've found, like someone messaged me an obscure book in the Bible where it's mentioned in, there's a variation of it in the, what's it called? The religion that's based out of Utah that started in New York. Mormons.
Yes.
In the Book of Mormon, there's a variation of it, and that's what means Prince of the Lord, but there's an extra, I think, I in it. But it basically falls like the actual name I was given was slightly different from the one I use. It falls very much on one side of the Kabbalah. Mm-hmm. And the last name I use, Azkath, which was also given to me, although not so profoundly, falls on the other side of the tree. So it's sort of a balance.
Okay. Now, if you don't mind me asking, who gave you these names?
I have no idea. It was literally, so that like I said, there was a sequence of weird stuff that happened to me. And right at a very liminal moment in my life, we were coming back from a Scorpions show in Rochester. And a friend of mine's driving. His wife's asleep in front of me. My friend's asleep next to me. We're driving along. Music's kind of low. And all of a sudden, very loudly, I just hear the name Seriah go through my head, like someone yelled it into my right ear, which is the ear up against the side of the car. Mm-hmm. And I was like, what the hell? And I look around and the two girls in the car are asleep. And I go to my other friend. I'm like, did you hear anything? And he's like, no, why? And I'm like, no reason. And I wrote it down and I'm like, I think this is supposed to be my name, but I wasn't going to use it. Like that seemed ridiculous to me. So I didn't. But slowly I started using it here and there. And as soon as I did, it started getting responses from people.
Yeah.
And part of that, I think, is also that it's unique and memorable. But it just like things changed for the better when I started using that name. And then I just got more and more comfortable using it.
So it rocked you like a hurricane.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
I'm a Scorpions fan myself. Now, I'd like to begin, just by discussing your personal experiences, those predating and leading up to this. What was the earliest you can remember?
Oh, geez. So here's the thing. Like, my memory is very Swiss cheesed before that event.
Okay.
I have some stuff written down, but a lot of it, I mean, I've always had weird, like, informative voices, but they're not by any means constant. There's no consistency. It's not like schizophrenia or anything. And a lot of times it's in that half point, like where you're falling asleep or whatever. So, like, sometimes, like, the one that stands out to me that meant nothing but turned out to be accurate, I would listen to tapes going to sleep, and I had fallen asleep, and a voice wakes me up and goes, "Turn the tape over." And I woke up, and then the tape stopped, and I went, "All right," and just turned the tape over and went back to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like there was a point to that, whether that was just my unconscious realizing the music stopped or what, but it's always the same voice. That's the thing. It's very interesting. So it could be like an anima animus type of thing. I don't know, but it's generally right when it tells me things.
You could be like Socrates with your own personal daemon.
Right, exactly. And the thing is, because other people have also encountered this being that I associate with the voice, it's kind of like, am I projecting it or does it exist on its own?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what is the being that you associate with the voice?
That I don't talk about.
Okay. Okay. I'll 100% respect. Will not test your boundaries. Do you think that Seriah could be an initiatory name?
It's very possible.
The same way those working within the Western esoteric tradition often take initiatory names?
Yes, yeah, definitely. And it when I looked back on it years later, I was kind of like, I was kind of drawn through this sort of shamanic awakening and then given the name. And I'm like, and that makes sense now, but at the time I was utterly confused as to what was happening to me.
Yeah.
And it was a huge Kundalini event that set that off. So I all of a sudden just felt like I was dying, what I wrote down was I felt like I was literally being torn apart. And for like an hour, I was just in pain. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to die. And I don't even know what's going on. And then it stopped. And as soon as it stopped, all this stuff from my past kind of like made sense.
Yeah.
And I started writing down all these things like, oh, this was this, and this was this. Why did I never connect any of this stuff before? And I wrote pages and pages of notes that were just personal stuff, like introspective stuff. And I was like, where did this all come from?
Now, how old were you when the Kundalini awakening happened?
Like 12 or 13.
Okay, so several years before you were given this name.
And I didn't know it was Kundalini even then. I don't think it was probably like this. So the awakening I put down to 1991 in May. I probably found out what Kundalini was in 92 or 93 when I finally came across the concept and was like, oh, hang on. This just described everything I'm experiencing.
Yeah. Do you remember what book or website it was that you read that in?
Oh yeah, so it was I used to get Fate magazine.
Yes.
And I thought it was it would ad in Fate magazine, but it wasn't. It was an ad in something I ordered out of Fate magazine. And it was just an ad for this book, Kundalini and the Chakras. And they had a list of symptoms of Kundalini awakening. And I'm looking through the list, that type of stuff didn't interest me. Chakras and energy, it was not something on my interest list at all. And so I'm reading this thing and I'm like, hang on, this is what I'm experiencing. What's happening here? And I immediately went to the library, and I think the first book I got was a John White book. It's a compilation of different essays from a variety of authors who have had both positive and negative experiences with Kundalini. And that helped me out a lot. I also ordered the book that I saw in the ad, which was very new agey, but it did help me with exercises on learning how to control it.
Now, it's interesting. Your Kundalini awakening, that would have occurred in like the mid 1980s.
No, the awakening was 91.
Okay, I'm confused then.
So what okay, so all right. Yeah, I think we're using different terminology. So the awakening, the thing that got me my name was 91.
Okay, yeah, and then
The initial awakening was in the early 80s.
yeah, at a time when Hinduism was becoming popular in the West,
I suppose.
through
I
the New Age
nothing
movement,
about it.
etc.
Yeah,
At least in some circles.
yeah, this was completely foreign to me.
Um, were there any events that precipitated that?
Well, it started off very small things, like I would hear cans rattling, and I thought it was like the recycling outside, and eventually determined there was definitely no recycling outside that was making that noise. I used to play trombone, and when I play it, sometimes I'd start seeing smoke come out of the end of the trombone, and I knew it wasn't there. Like my logical mind is saying, I'm hallucinating this. What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
And I'd call my mother in and I'd tell her what I was experiencing, and she's like, well, that's silly. And I'm like, well, just sit there for a minute and tell me if you see anything. And I'd play it and it wouldn't do it. And I'd go, never mind. Okay. And she'd leave. I'd play it and it'd start doing it again. And eventually I was just like, all right, whatever. I'm hallucinating this weird thing for, you know, whatever reason. But it was very isolated little things like that. And eventually it started causing me pain. And that's when it really started messing up my life, because I went to so many doctors, and I was as healthy as you could possibly be. I mean, they even took me to psychiatrists and stuff to make sure that I wasn't like, somehow not balanced right and making this up or
Making sure
whatever.
these weren't psychosomatic experiences.
Right. Yeah. And through all of it, no one could help me. And so I shut up about it. I just didn't talk about it. I dealt with it on my own. It would cause me so much pain that it would almost cause me to black out sometimes.
What kinds of pain and where?
Usually on my tailbone. That was the tailbone and stomach were the two places that it would hurt the most. I think the tailbone was often the worst. Like just above the tailbone, it would feel like someone had shoved a flaming knife into my spine and was twisting it.
Ugh.
And
But that is where Kundalini is said to originate, is at the base of the spine.
Right. That is the base chakra. Again, I knew nothing about chakras. So when I started looking at all this stuff, I'm like, well, those are the two places it hurts,
Mm-hmm. And after you had let's rewind here. When the experience finally did occur in full, where were you? What time of day was it? What were you doing? What did it feel like?
The actual awakening?
Yeah.
I was like organizing stuff in my room at like 2 a.m. or 3 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't doing anything particularly notable. And it just struck me like getting hit by a ton of bricks. And I was like, what is happening right now?
And how long did it last?
Probably about an hour.
Okay, well, what did you do after that? Did you wake your parents?
That's when I started writing.
Okay.
I was like, all of a sudden, all this stuff was really obvious. And I'm like, I'm going to write this down before I forget. At this point, I'd already started recording notes regularly of things that were happening to me and things I did.
Yeah.
Because I started that at the end of 1990, and this happened in May of 91.
Okay. Now, if you don't mind me asking, were you like me, the kind of kid that spent a lot of time alone with his thoughts, was up alone at night a lot?
Sometimes. I mean, I had a decent number of friends, but I mean, I also did, it was kind of 50-50, I'd say.
But you had an active inner life.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so did I. I think that in itself is a liminal thing.
I'm one of those kids who enjoyed reading and, being alone, reading, listening to music, and that was weird to other people.
Yeah, same. So as like a young adult in the early 90s, having made this recognition, where did you go from there? Did the experiences continue, or?
Oh yeah, they continue up to this day.
Okay.
Like the Kundalini, it comes and goes in like almost like waves. Like I'll have nothing notable happen, and then a bunch of notable stuff happen in a short time period. So I don't know if they're transition periods. I had something happen the other night that like I knew was a Kundalini thing. I have no idea exactly what it was doing. I all of a sudden was like, I need to lay down. Like I am so tired. I am so exhausted. I can barely keep my eyes open, which is weird for me. And it was way earlier than I normally go to sleep. It was like 10:30 at night, which is, I mean, I'm a night person, so that's like going to sleep at noon for most people. And so I laid down, and I didn't exactly sleep, but I had a ton of pulsating energy. I don't know if I have the note here, but I had oh yeah, the first thing that happened is I stopped hearing a sound I didn't realize I was hearing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm laying there, and I can feel the energy just kind of vibrating me. And all of a sudden, everything's quiet, and I'm like, "What just happened?"
Yeah.
I'm like, I was hearing a buzzing sound. I didn't realize it because it had been there for so long. And I can't remember the next thing that happened, but the last thing that happened was a boom that sounded like it came from the other side of my house. A very, very loud boom, but I also felt like it was in my head. And a few seconds after that, I felt like the shockwave of it run through my body, and that everything returned to normal.
Now, have you noticed any distinct pattern to these occurrences? Do they tend to occur more frequently at certain times, at certain days of the week,
Nope,
in certain seasons?
not at all.
Completely random. See, that to me would be very frustrating because there's no lead, there's no clues, there's nothing to go on there.
Exactly. And, you know, sometimes it still causes me pain, even though I know how to deal with it usually. It'll do it sometimes, like last New Year's? Yeah, driving home from a friend's house last New Year's. Suddenly I got a spike of pain up my spine while I'm driving, and I'm kind of trying to arch my back straight, you know, and get the energy moving. And I'm like, I can't do this while I'm driving. Holy crap, this hurts really bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I stopped and got out of the car, and I did some stretches and some breathing, and it started to go down. I get back in the car and I start driving, and it kicks in again. And I'm like, oh, come on. Like, I literally could not drive home because I was in so much pain. And finally it just stopped. And I was like, great, now I can go home. Like, I was driving in spurts, but I kept having to pull over to the side of the road and just deal with it.
Did you? I assume this aroused the attention of other drivers of.
Oh no, it was late. There was no one around.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's odd because like where I live, the roads and highways are always packed, like even well into the wee hours. I don't know why.
I'm in upstate New York, so I mean it's very sparse.
It is kind of interesting, kind of vaguely interesting. You mentioned earlier that in one of the Mormon scriptures, the name Seriah is mentioned.
Yeah.
Because that began in upstate New York.
That it did.
In kind of the burned over, what they call the burned over district.
Yep. Probably about 45 minutes from here.
Yeah, and that area was a hot spot back at the time for religious activity, bizarre religious activity.
Yeah, well, you have the was it the Knox? Not what was the name of the sisters with the Knox and everything?
The Foxes?
The Foxes, yeah, they were about an hour from here.
The birth of spiritualism.
Yep. Jane Roberts Seth was also about Roberts about 40 minutes from here.
Mormonism, the JWs, Christian Science, Seventh-day Adventists. It really all kind of in the same place at the same time. That's interesting to me. It'd be interesting to see what Peter Levenda would have to say about that.
Yeah.
Does your family have an extensive history in the area?
No. Nope. Everyone grew. My family was living on Long Island. My grandparents moved up here, and then my parents wanted to move up here as well because once they visited them up here, they liked it. So.
Okay.
But this whole area, though, I mean, has a history of things like UFO sightings and other weirdness.
How far are you from the Hudson Valley, the place of the Hudson Valley UFO flap?
That's a ways away. That's about 4 hours.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're dead center of the state, right in the middle of the Finger Lakes.
So, have you seen UFOs or anything like that in the area?
Well, there's one that was really major, but there were no real effects from it. It was at a very liminal point in my life, which I didn't realize. I was telling Mike Cleland about it, and he said,
Mm-hmm.
"What was going on in your life at the time?" And I went, "I have no idea." So I had to find it, look it up, and went, "Oh, that was in a massive shift of a lot of stuff in my life. That was like one of the biggest changes in my life up to that point when I saw this UFO." But I was driving to my radio station. And it was like 11:30 at night, something like that. And something blinded me from the side of Cayuga Lake. And I thought it was just a car coming up from the lake because there's a lot of driveways that kind of like arc up. And so if a car's coming, the headlights will hit you pretty hard sometimes.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking that's what it is, but it doesn't stop. And I'm like, why is that thing still blinding me? And finally I kind of squinted through it and I just see this huge object in the sky with a billion lights on it. And they're just kind of, there's lights on top and the bottom and a bunch of lights racing from like left to right along the middle of it.
Yeah.
And almost like they're going out on one side and coming in on the other side. I don't know if it was going around, but I couldn't see through it. But I still don't know if it was just lights or if there was a solid object there. It was making no noise whatsoever. I pulled over and I'm watching this thing and I'm like, I have no explanation for what this is. It was so bright that if, it was blotting out anything on the other side. So even if there were just lights, I couldn't see through it. And then it slowly just dropped down toward the lake, which also gave me an idea of how big it was because the lake was a distance away.
Mm-hmm.
And it moved under, behind the trees by the lake and then disappeared, I assume, into the lake. But I couldn't actually see the lake where it went down on the lake.
And was that the first UFO you've seen, or?
I can definitely say I saw, yeah.
Okay. I had one experience, which I think we discussed when I was on your show months ago, but we may not have. This was in the early 2010s. My father and I were at our cabin. It was Saturday night, not terribly late, maybe 9:30 to 10. And we were standing at the edge of our driveway, right on the dirt road. And we were staring down right a ways. And we saw I can only describe it as a terrestrial constellation. Like a close grouping of twinkling red lights, not in the sky, just like above the ground, maybe about 6 or 7 feet high. Imagine a Christmas tree lights without a Christmas tree.
Yeah.
Just suspended in the air. And we watched it for about 10 minutes or so, and then we went away, and then we came back a few minutes later, and it was gone. I have no idea what, if anything, that meant.
Yeah. I've had a lot of those type of experience. Like, what was that? What meaning was it? Doesn't seem like it's just like a blow off of energy or something.
Yeah. About your Kundalini saga, it's interesting how in one of Brad Steiger's final books, he had a guest essay by a man who was a Western convert to Islam, explaining his thoughts on Kundalini, and he speculates that it's a mechanism designed to facilitate a bond, and not necessarily a symbiotic bond, but a bond nonetheless, between a human being and a disincarnate entity. That it's designed to alter the person such that they can become, so that this thing can become connected to it. Do you think that's what happened to you in light of the fact that you've heard these voices, that you were given this name?
I don't think that's what happened, but I mean, I never really thought about it before. It's an interesting idea. I mean, it definitely opened my senses up to other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't feel like, I feel like these things, I've had things that seem like they're just sort of guardians watching over me or watching.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also had, very visceral interactions with certain entities. And that like the one that gave me the name, and that sticks around. That's been very consistent. Whereas there's others that, see, a lot of times I have a hard time believing this is anything but like another part of me.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a part of our unconscious or a different part of our consciousness that we don't have access to. And like even when I decided I was going to write a book about these experiences, which I still haven't gotten anywhere near finished, as soon as I said that to myself, every night when I went to sleep, I would hear someone walk into my room and stand next to my bed.
Yeah.
And I would stop and be like, and I think the first time I thought it was my girlfriend at the time. And I'm like, why is she just standing next to the bed? And I turn on the light and there's no one there. And I'm like, oh, because she's not. Okay. And every single night this repeated. And finally I said, okay, I know not to put everything in the book. And then it just stopped.
That's interesting.
So it's because I felt like it was kind of pushing me toward writing about this stuff, but it also, there's certain things that, like this entity, I don't really say anything about.
Yeah. Now, are you allowed to discuss your experiences with the Guardians?
Most of the time they're well, okay. Most of the time that's altered states.
Mm-hmm.
So out of body experiences, things like that. I have a lot of really freaky dream experiences
Okay.
that do not seem like real dreams.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, for instance, one of the ones that happened in the last few years, it was just a very typical dream. I'm in a record store. It's like this warehouse. There's all these like floors on like these thin wooden boards. It was a really cool record shop. And I'm flipping through and I get to the end. I'm going through the V's and I remember seeing like Voivod and stuff. I'm like, oh, cool. And then I get done and I start to leave and I get toward the door and suddenly it stops being a dream. Everything freezes. And this being or beings, it felt like more than one say, what's the worst thing that ever happened to you in your life? And I wasn't allowed to get out of the dream or out of the store in the dream until I answered the question.
Huh. I'm not going to ask you what you told them, but did you answer them?
I had a hard time answering them because my outlook a lot of times is that no matter how bad something is, a lot of times good things come of it.
Yeah.
They put an image in my brain of when my dad died, but it did not play out like what actually happened. And I stopped and said, that's not what happened. And I'm like, why did I get something that wasn't, the actual event?
So they're like guardians that challenge you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Watchers, guardians.
what do they look like if you've seen them?
I've not generally seen them.
Just a voice.
Yeah. A
What
voice
is
feeling.
Okay, what does the voice sound like? Tonally.
In that case, it's usually a very deep male voice.
Okay.
Like very authoritative.
Yeah. Now, how many of these experiences have you had over the years? And when did they start?
Oh, geez, those probably started before I started recording stuff, and I don't remember.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean they're not like a daily thing. There's something that happen every once in a while. Sometimes I'll have I hesitate to call it sleep paralysis because sleep paralysis is, waking up and your body doesn't wake up with it. Whereas what will happen to me, a lot of times it happens the minute I lay down, where I suddenly am paralyzed. And I'll be like, I haven't even fallen asleep yet. And then something's in the room and sometimes it talks to me and I have to like fight to wake myself up.
Mm-hmm. And again, this thing in the room is not something you see. It's just a presence that you feel.
That you feel, yes. Very distinct. And like I said, sometimes it talks.
Mm-hmm.
One that creeped me out is I laid down and immediately felt the pressure on and it happens a lot when I lay on my my right side. And I don't know why. Keel said something about hearing stuff from one side or the other, and I can't remember which it is now. And I found that's often the case with me. But I'll lay down on my right side, and I felt the presence of a friend of mine's grandmother.
Okay.
And I heard her voice say something. I forget what it was because it was a couple years ago now, but it just creeped me out because it was like telling me to tell her something. And I'm like, okay, I'm creeped out right now. I'm trying to break free of this. And finally I snapped, free of it. And I'm like, what the hell was that? And as soon as I lay back down on my right side, I start feeling it start again. I'm like, nope, okay, rolling over on the other side.
What do you think the points of these experiences are? Because obviously they're intrusive. Obviously they're often unwanted. Do you think you're just being trolled, or do you think it's trying to force you to think or to confront something?
I think when it's asking me like what the worst experience is, it's helping me to develop certain things, even if it's not obvious what it is. I don't a lot of times I don't really mind the experiences because I find them interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But, sometimes I'm just tired and want to go to sleep. Or sometimes I want to wake up. There have been times where there was one that sticks out to me where I woke up, got out of bed, looked around, and I'm like, something's not right. And then I was laying in bed again, and I'm like, I wasn't awake. Okay. I'm like, but I'm awake now. And I'm laying in bed going, that was weird. And this arm reaches up through my bed, grabs my leg, and it felt like steel. And I couldn't get it off, and I started to panic and went, wait, I'm still asleep. And I woke up. And I was like, okay, let's not do that one again. That kind of sucked. And I looked over at the clock and there were no numbers. And I went, I'm still asleep. God damn it. And this repeated for, I don't know, like 10 times before I was finally awake. And then I'm looking around going, I'm awake this time, right? Because I felt awake before and I wasn't.
Well, usually when we interview people on this show, like, they'll say something that speaks to something that I have a background in, that I can kind of respond to and maybe offer an insight into, but I just can't do that with your stories.
I mean, there's a lot of dream stuff that's happened, but there's also been a lot of weird things that people have experienced with me.
Yeah.
And some of the strangest things that have happened to me have happened with other people there. There was this was luckily when I started keeping notes. There was a potter's field. There still is a potter's field. It's a very beautiful area in Willard where they would bury the psychiatric patients from the Willard Psychiatric Center who didn't have families. And there were very few tombstones and stuff. There's also a Civil War graveyard that's a part of it, an old Jewish cemetery that's a part of it. And it was on top of this cliff that overlooks Seneca Lake. So when I used to hang out with my friends down there, we'd go up there, and eventually we built a little bench on the edge of the cliff. And a few weird things happened there, but the one that happened with witnesses was we're standing on another clearing we had made further down on the cliff. And we're standing by this huge tree. And you can't see through the tree to the field. The bush was thick enough that you couldn't really see, but the whole tree, and I'm not talking like a 3-story tall tree, it was a fairly small tree, but it just starts shaking. And the first thing I thought is there's a buck on the other side running its horns against it because you could feel this like thudding on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, crap. If that's a buck, we're going to have to like crawl down the cliff to get away from it because it's, a buck and it's running its horns and it's probably not going to be happy to see us. It's probably doing it because it can hear us or smell us. And so my one friend is freaking out and I'm like, okay, calm down. And I walk down the trail till I could see the other side of the tree and there's nothing there. And the tree stops shaking. So he's like, what is it? And I'm like, there's nothing. And he's like, and he is panicking. He's like, there's no way it's nothing. And I walk back and it starts shaking again. So he's really losing it. And I walk this time all the way around to the other side of the tree. Now I'm in the field. There's nothing anywhere around us. And I'm like, dude, there's nothing here, especially not anything that could shake a tree. So I go back around and it starts shaking again. And now he's like, we got to go. And my other friend, who apparently thought we were making it up just to mess with him, wasn't seeing the tree shake. So finally he's like, what are you guys talking about? And we're like, you don't see this tree shaking right here. And he's like, I don't see anything shaking. And we're like, okay, that's even weirder.
So you told me earlier you've had what you described as visceral experiences with certain entities.
Mm-hmm.
Could you describe those?
Not easily. I mean, they're not experiences where like, again, that they're visceral, again, in the dream state, out of body state.
Okay.
including one that left bruises on me, which really freaked me out.
You were attacked directly.
Sort of. I was I was yeah, I guess I could talk about this because this happened right before the whole awakening thing.
Okay.
And I found myself actually in that potter's field after
Well,
I'd
stop. Stop.
yeah.
You sound hesitant. If you're hesitant at all, you don't have to describe it.
No, I'm pretty sure I've talked about it before.
Okay.
Um, so I found myself like out of body in this potter's field, and there are these hooded figures making a circle around me, and there's this dark shadow,
Mm-hmm.
like blacker than black shadow, not a figure, just like a mass of darkness. And and I'm standing there not knowing what's going on, and this thing runs me down, flattens me to the ground like getting hit by a truck. And it hurt. And I was like, what the hell? And I get back up and it does it again. And I get back up because that's how I am. And so like it just keeps flattening me. And each time it hits me, it hurts more. And finally, one of the guardian spirits, the not the ones sitting watching, but one of the ones that I felt was like that would actually communicate information to me, starts going, "Stay down or you're gonna die." And I'm like, I'm not staying down. I didn't know if that was the point. I don't know. Still to this day, I'm not sure what the point was, but I kept getting up and it kept hitting me just as hard each time. And all of a sudden, this being grabs me and drags me back into my body very, very suddenly, like to the point where I actually lifted off the bed. And I was sore and had bruises all over me for the next few days.
What did it feel like when it hit you? It felt like a dude kicking your ass?
No, it felt like a solid object, like literally like being hit by a car. Like something just flattening you to the ground at high, like it didn't roll over me. It slammed me into the ground.
Do you think this could have been a test of some sort, or do you think it
That's
could
what
have been a literal attack and there could have on you to hurt you, and there could have been a literal conflict occurring between these entities and your guardian?
So when it first happened, it freaked me out. And after this, two other people I knew saw this shadow thing right afterwards. And so I was really freaked out. Like one of them was into Wicca and stuff, and she was just like, "What did you do?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I didn't do anything. Like this just happened."
Mm-hmm.
But when I looked back on it over time, I feel like it was a test of some sort. Now, whether it was a test that I would actually be smart enough to stay down, or whether it was a test that I would keep getting up, I'm not entirely sure. Like, am I smart enough to stay down when I can't win, or am I, do I have the guts to keep getting up even though I can't win?
So I assume when Chumbawamba's Tub Thumping was released years later, you didn't take kindly to that song.
I know the name. I don't think I know the song.
I get knocked down, but I get up again. You're never gonna keep me down.
Actually, I think what went through my mind when I woke up was I think Ric Flair at some point saying, "I can get up one more time than you can knock me down."
That's cool. That's cool. So I think we've established that there are multiple entities that have been involved in your life,
Oh yes, definitely.
and that they're not all on the same team.
Well, that's hard to say. I mean, from a different perspective, they may be. Some are
Or,
more nurturing, some are more confrontational.
but so you're saying that they could all be on the same side. They just play different roles for different purposes, all of which do have a constructive point.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. And
Like I said, it was a little bit after that experience that the whole Kundalini awakening happened, you know?
could it be that was a test to see if you were ready for the Kundalini awakening?
It's entirely possible.
I know I'm probably not speculating anything that you haven't already speculated yourself.
Well, you mentioned the one thing I hadn't thought about Kundalini being a possibility of connecting with another spirit. That I had never come across.
Perhaps.
I mean, Kundalini too. I mean, it's considered in Eastern cultures as like an evolutionary force.
Okay. Yeah. Although, it was my understanding that Kundalini is not part of traditional Hinduism, that it was either discovered or kind of cultivated more in the modern era,
It could
sometime in the 20th century. I read that on a website, on an article on a website a number of years ago. It may or may not have been true.
and it's been so long since I've researched the origins of Kundalini. I honestly don't remember. I think because I think there's Buddhist connections too.
Yeah. Yeah, Hinduism being or Buddhism being an offshoot of Hinduism.
Yeah. And there's other, I think when you see Christians being, taken by the Holy Spirit, I think they may be having a Kundalini experience. It's just a different name for this energy. And
Oh, what they call being slain by the Spirit
right.
in
There are
in
also
charismatic churches, charismatic and neo-Pentecostal churches.
there are also laughing churches. And one of the things Kundalini can do is make you really laugh. Except you're not laughing at anything funny. It's not like contagious laughter, like when a bunch of people are laughing and you start laughing and it's funny because you're laughing. It's a weird sort of uncomfortable, like you're laughing and you have no idea why. And I've had this experience a number of times where I've been able to spread it to people. Like I'll grab a hold of someone and they'll start laughing and they don't know why, and it scares the hell out of them. And I've seen these videos of laughing churches where the preacher will start and he'll start grabbing people and they'll start laughing and they'll grab the person next to them and they'll start laughing. And I'm like, they're making a chain of this Kundalini energy without, and they're attributing it to the Holy Spirit because that's their camouflage for this experience.
Are you familiar with the Toronto Blessing?
No.
That was a charismatic Christian revival that occurred in Toronto in the early 90s. I forget which year exactly, which was very controversial at the time, and to a large degree it still is, where for like multiple days this shit was going on. Falling over, rolling around on the floor, convulsions, shaking, uh, animal noises, laughter, as you describe, glossolalia, et cetera, et cetera. And I have to be honest, that stuff has always bothered me.
Why?
Like, I have relatives who are charismatic Christians
Mm-hmm.
who loyally attend a charismatic church. And out of respect for them, I'm not going to divulge any further information about, their roles therein. But I've been kind of forced to attend their services in the past. And, this phenomena occurs there.
Right.
And it makes me very uncomfortable. It just seems very unnatural, very almost demented at times.
Sure.
I went to one Saturday night's worship service once. It was a small service, and there weren't that many in attendance. The one that stands out in my memory is a man who walked in completely normal, and during the service, he gravitated towards the front of the room, and he gradually became more and more bizarre to the point where he was, I think, laying on the floor, and he was making like laser gun noises, pew pew pew.
Wow.
Like a child would, like I've seen mentally retarded adults do.
Right.
And yeah, he wasn't just a troll. He wasn't just a guy, putting on a show to mock them. He was under the influence of some energy, and and it was so over the top. I stayed out of respect for my family, but as soon as I could, I was gone, man. It's interesting. The main hub for that stuff in North America really is Bill and Penny Johnson's Bethel Church.
Not familiar.
In Redding, California. Now, I read an article on Pathos a number of years ago by a Wiccan. who attended one of their services, and it was very interesting. She claimed that, as soon as she walked in, she felt the energy. It hit her
Mm-hmm.
heavily. It was the same energy that she knew from her own practice. Um, you know, and she left with the conclusion that charismatic Christians are doing magic. They're working magic,
Yeah.
or at least they're working with the same energies that magicians use. They just call it something different.
Right.
And that's very interesting to me. But yet again, I've never really been able to draw any more conclusions. I've never been, I've never found much fertile soil to really dig in there for more information.
Well, I think that's the case, and I think the silly behavior. I mean, the silly behavior could certainly be caused by Kundalini, but it could also be a way of raising it too. Like that might be what works for him to kind of get that energy going for whatever reason, whatever he believes it is. I mean, Kundalini is just a convenient name for it, but it's still a camouflage of whatever that reality is.
Yeah, and it is interesting that many of the practices specific to charismatics are often like new age practices that were popular in the 70s and 80s, just rebranded.
Right.
Things like soaking prayer, contemplative prayer, sozo therapy, etc., often make use of like guided imagery, visualization, etc.
Yeah. Yep.
Very, very like late 20th century new age, very 70s, 80s new age. Um, it's interesting at this church that they went to, or that they still go to, there is a history of bizarre paranormal phenomena in the building.
Mm-hmm.
There was my cousin had a string of experiences back in 2006, but those are his experiences. Out of respect for him, I'll keep those under wraps. But they did have one episode or a series of episodes where the prayer room, this small furnished room towards the back of the building, where there was a very dark, a very sinister presence, there.
Yeah.
That when someone would go back there and pray, it would intensify as if deliberately trying to drive them out.
Huh.
I went there with him one afternoon to check. I think it was like the bass amp for the worship team or the mixing board or something. This was years ago. And there were strange sounds. We heard it sounded like a puppy whining, like a puppy whimpering, like a puppy was getting its ass kicked.
Huh.
And keep in mind, this was early afternoon, broad daylight. People were out and about, mowing their lawns, walking their dogs, etc. But we did not see a puppy nearby because we were inside. We would not have heard a puppy from outside. This was coming from within the building. Right. And there was a weird, faint, is it there or isn't quality to it. You know that those anomalous sounds, they have that quality.
Yep.
Where you're not sure if you're actually hearing them or not, and then afterward you could almost convince yourself you didn't.
Yeah.
It was like that. And so I don't know what was going on. They were convinced that demons were invading their church to try to upset it.
Well, sure.
To interfere with their practices. But I'm of the mind that it was their own weird practices that was inviting this phenomenon in the first place.
And there's always going to be a mix of positive and negative energy in the people there. So if you're putting this energy out there, it's probably going to accumulate. You're going to make the place haunted basically by giving it energy.
Yes. Yeah, I personally think they were feeding it themselves and without knowing it.
Yeah.
But whatever. What are some other experiences you've had with others, where others who normally would not have weird experiences have them?
I had one friend who had a few of these experiences with me. Ironically, he was the one when the tree was shaking who didn't see the tree shaking. And for years, I thought it was the other way around. I thought it was my other friend who didn't see the tree shaking because this guy had been with me for other experiences. So I'm like, well, why is he the one that didn't see it? Like, that logically didn't make sense to me. The one that I always consider a maybe, although it's unlikely to be a person, we were walking. He had this thing where he would like a girl and he'd want someone to go with him to see said girl, but he wouldn't tell us that's what was going on. So he'd just be like, hey, let's go do this. And we'd start doing this. And he'd be like, hey, let's go do the next thing you know, we're at a girl's house or we're meeting a girl somewhere. And we're like, why didn't you just say something? You know, why all the runaround? So this happened one night. We were walking around town and he's like, oh, let's go here. We've never walked up there. And we walked quite a distance from his house and eventually ended up at this girl's house. But before we got there, we were on this back country road. It's like 1:00 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
So dark out, you can't see your hand in front of your face. We didn't have flashlights or anything. And we're like walking down this road and he stops because he needs to relieve himself on the side of the road. And while he's doing this, we hear these steady footsteps coming down the road.
Mm-hmm.
And they walk. They never change pace. They never made another sound other than the footsteps. And it walks right between us and then just keeps going. And we're going, do you hear footsteps? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, what the hell? Is someone there? And no response, no nothing. They didn't speed up. They didn't slow down. And it was just like, who in their right mind would be out in this, country road in the middle of nowhere at like 1:00 in the morning without a flashlight other than us?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there was nothing else that happened from it. It was just one of those things that stuck out as weird. And it's one of the things I hadn't written down. It was before I started recording stuff. And when I talked to him a few years ago, I was like, hey, do you remember when this happened? And I laid the whole thing out for him. He's like, yep. But that wasn't the weirdest thing that happened when I was with you. I'm like, but I have the other stuff written down. And he's going, yeah, but the other stuff was way weirder. And I'm like, I know.
No, the footsteps, were they like the footsteps that would later come into your room while you were starting to write your book?
No, it sounded like someone walking down the road. I mean, that's really what it sounded like, but we couldn't see anyone. And it was so dark that hypothetically someone could have been there and we wouldn't see them.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems very unlikely that anyone would have been out at that hour. I mean, literally, there's nothing around for like miles. And, not carrying a flashlight when it's so dark.
See, once again, that's frustrating because there's no apparent purpose.
Right. Exactly.
Unless we're wrong, because we both seem to be coming, at this from the perspective of, well, these are staged events that you are deliberately meant to experience.
Right.
And that might not be the case. The more traditional paranormal explanation, the more traditional mainstream paranormal explanation may be the case. May be more accurate. It could be there is just something that inhabits that area that makes the rounds at night or possibly during the day, and you just happen to be in the right place in the right time to hear it.
Sure.
And theoretically anyone traversing that stretch at that time would have heard that.
Yeah, possibly.
Perhaps a human ghost, perhaps something a little more exotic than that.
Or even a recording on the area of someone walking when they were really emotionally upset. The stone tape idea,
Mm-hmm. Residue.
Yeah.
Influence.
I've had others okay. So there was one day I pulled into my driveway and I have this long driveway and I stopped. I think we had cones up because the driveway kept flooding and it would get really muddy. And so we had to make sure people didn't come into the driveways. So I moved the cone, got out, put the cone back, got back in the car. And while I'm sitting there on the right side of the driveway, I see this ball just like light up like a tumbleweed of sparklers.
Mm-hmm.
And it rolls from the right side of the driveway to the left side of the driveway. And then it just dissipates. And I'm like, what the hell was that? I mean, there's no natural phenomena that would do that. But again, it feels like it was just like showing me something, and I'm like, I don't know what that was.
Huh. Do you think it might not be showing you something though? Like there's a chance that this could really just be tricksterdom?
Oh, it's entirely possible. I mean,
That, our
I don't take any of it 100% seriously. I always take it with a grain of salt, like,
yeah.
okay, that happened, whatever. And when people are around me and weird stuff happens, because I have this sort of like, yep, whatever, it's weird things. They're like, what do you mean it's just weird things,
Have you ever had that happen with like a stranger, with someone you just met?
I don't think so.
Because that would be interesting, having to explain that, in that situation.
Um, but that friend, whose name was Dave, he,
Mm-hmm.
we had gone to see Overkill,
Mm-hmm.
and we came back to my house, and he had to come in, or I had to go. I was running in to get him something, and then he was going to go home, and we pull in, and he turns the car off, and we're sitting there for a minute talking, and we hear this scream, and kind of like the puppy noise you described, like it was a very distinct scream. It sounded like a guy, but there was no attack or decay on the sound. It was at a level pitch the entire time. And it went on for like 10, 15 seconds and then just stopped. But it was also very, very quiet,
Mm-hmm.
while at the same time sounding like it was in the car with us. And we both just stopped talking because we heard it. And then it stopped. And he went, what the hell was that? I'm like, sounded like a scream. I'm like, I'm going to go in and get that thing for you, whatever it was, tape or something. And I get out of the car. He's like, I'm not sitting out here alone. And he gets out of the car, and I start walking toward the house, and he's looking around kind of panicked. And I get under this huge oak tree that we have. And on the ground, I see this like kaleidoscope of colors,
Mm-hmm.
literally moving like you would see in a kaleidoscope, but they're circles of primary color, like red, green, blue type of thing. And they kind of move in and out a couple of times and then disappear. And I'm like, lights. And then he realizes I'm quite a distance from him. And he's like, how did you get over there? I don't know. Come, and he comes running over to me because he's freaked out. And he's like, what lights? I'm like, I don't know. They're gone. But like, that was it. There was nothing else to that experience. He didn't see the lights, but I have a hard time assuming that the lights and scream weren't part of the same energy, the same experience. Yeah. I just don't know what it was.
And Bobby Blaze was not hiding in your back seat.
No.
You see, for me, I look at that and I think, again, are they related? Yeah, but perhaps once again, it wasn't a staged event. Perhaps there is some unseen world, and those were both things occurring in this unseen world that, due to some glitch.
Right. We intruded into it in a sense.
Yeah, you just momentarily became aware of it. Perhaps in this world, some political dissident had been kidnapped and he was being tortured, and that's, you heard the scream, and perhaps their torture technology involves bright colors to harm the eyes, and you saw briefly, you saw kind of a dull, dimmed version of that. I don't know, or maybe it does have some weird esoteric significance that you're supposed to decipher, or maybe that you're not supposed to decipher. Maybe the intelligence behind it thinks that you already understand or would understand and doesn't realize that you don't.
Right.
But let's speculate. What could that be? What would the scream represent? What would the colors represent?
I have no idea, but I will say over the years, we've come to realize that light is one of the most common things you have in weird experiences.
Yes.
Strange lights exist in almost every area of the paranormal. So light is something to this. And what? I don't know, but primary colors in particular are what people tend to see.
Could we just defer to Keel there and say it has something to do with the light is literally from the energy itself moving through the EM spectrum? And that's just so the lights are just an unintended side effect of the mechanics of how it manifests.
Well, one of the weirdest experiences I've had was seeing a light in the field behind my house. I used to regularly take walks in the middle of the night,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm out there and I look into the field. And the field normally, I mean, it's so dark out there you can see the entire Milky Way. It's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm out there and I look and there's this light in the field and there's nothing in that field. There's never been a light there and it's a very faint light. And I'm like, what is that? And I'm thinking, well, farmer probably left his tractor out there or something. And I don't think too much more about it. And I kept getting these flashes of light, like the entire landscape would light up. It's like someone took a flash photo. And I've had this happen other times, but this was probably the most intense that had ever happened. And I'm just like, okay, this is continuing. And it was also a full moon. And I'm standing there and I'm looking up at the moon, and the moon starts to get covered with clouds. And I said, all right, I'm just watching it. And suddenly the moon is covered with clouds. And then it comes out of the clouds, through the clouds, and starts vibrating. And I'm looking, going, well, that's not possible. So I look away and I look back, and the moon looks normal. And then it pops through the clouds and it starts vibrating again. And I'm like, huh. I'm like, this is a really weird optical illusion. At the same time, I'm noticing that light in the field has been blinking on and off this whole time. And I'm looking at it, trying to see, like, is there a tractor there or something? And the light goes out and doesn't come back on. I'm like, huh, all right. I look away, the light comes back on. I catch it out of my peripheral vision. So eventually, I time the light at like 7 seconds on, 7 seconds off, unless I look at it. If I look at it, once it goes off, it doesn't come back on until I look away.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, that's just weird, because it implies it's responding to me looking at it, and it couldn't possibly be a person. It's way too, not only is it too far away, but I mean, it would have to be someone that knew I was going to go out at that hour randomly and be waiting in the field to mess with me.
Yeah.
And it doesn't explain the flashes of light or the moon aberrations. And I felt completely normal through this whole thing. I've never done drugs in my life. I drank a little bit when I was a teenager and pretty much stopped when I was like 22 or something like that. So, it's not like I had something else in my system affecting me. But I think that, like, the way I look at it now is that there was probably something with the energy of the area that was actually creating a light, whether it be a ball of plasma or something that was responding to me. But alternately, it was also affecting my brain in a way that was causing these weird, flashes of light, as well as this hallucination of the moon.
Do you, I've theorized that these lights actually are the entities themselves, kind of in their natural default form.
Yeah, that's entirely possible.
Before they assume any other form.
Or we put a form on them.
Yeah. And because I read in an article by Nick Redfern last year, which Nick Redfern, as an aside, he's Nick Redfern. Where it was a story of a woman who was in the woods and she saw what appeared to be like a black dog or an anomalous large cat type creature. I forget which one, and she saw it gradually dissipate into gas, what can be described as a gas, and then that gas congealed into like an orb, like a glowing light, and then the light just flew off.
Yeah.
So, that if that anecdote is true, then perhaps that would lend support to that assertion. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's entirely possible. I mean, we may all just be beings of light in the end.
Yeah.
I mean, we know this reality isn't, what it seems to be.
Yeah, we are the prisoners in the cave.
Yeah.
Which, and it's interesting how modern science has confirmed indirect perception as opposed to naive realism. If you look into the science of perception, how we don't see the world directly. What we see is a mental image or a construct that our mind assembles based on incoming sense data.
Right. Yes.
So kind of like Immanuel Kant in his metaphysics.
And I always recommend people read the book The Invisible Gorilla.
I've never heard of it.
So
Yeah.
this was a psychological experiment that went viral a few years ago, but there's an entire book about some of the other experiments they did. But basically, in The Invisible Gorilla, it's a video of people playing basketball, and you're supposed to count how many times they like pass the ball, like one team passes the ball.
Mm-hmm.
And while this is happening, a guy in a gorilla suit walks on screen and dances in the middle of them, and then like wanders off. And 50% of the people watching that video do not see the guy in the gorilla suit. And
That's interesting.
Yeah,
because
they call it the illusion of attention. So you're meant to be focused on one thing. So your brain actually just looks at that and says that's not important. It doesn't even bother to tell you about it.
yeah, so basically what you see and don't see is partly determined by your state of mind, your focus,
Yep.
which you have a degree of control over. So
Right.
I guess if you were to harness and cultivate that, you could decide what you see and don't see.
Like they did research on the safety of pedestrians, and they said that no matter how many signs and stuff are put up that say watch for pedestrians in different cities, the cities who have the most pedestrians, where the people are used to pedestrians being there, actually have the least accidents, even though they have more pedestrians and more traffic, because people will literally just not see them in other cities. It's not that they're not looking. They look, and their brain literally just doesn't register that there's a person there.
That's interesting, and that could also explain why people who are more willing to believe in these things are more likely to see them.
Right.
Which that's a thread in and of itself. That's a rabbit hole in and of itself. It's like, could that be the next step in Fortean research? Is researchers deliberately conditioning themselves to be able to perceive these things better?
And I wonder if there's just some people who who are just like people are colorblind, may just be blind to this stuff, because there are plenty of researchers who would love nothing more than to have an experience, and they never do.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I've had a lifetime of experiences. My family collectively is affected by this. I'm not the only one in my family who's had a lifetime of experiences. Clearly, there is something going on with us. I don't know how I think about my experiences. I don't know if I like them or not. I don't know if I had a choice. I don't know if I would have had them or not, but I didn't have a choice.
See, I definitely would have had them. I wouldn't change anything. Even the ones that seem negative, again, they kind of put me in a better place, I think, overall.
Yeah.
So that's generally just how I look at the world, where it's like, yeah, that sucked, but on the other side of it, I learned a lot, and, now I have that experience and I know better.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess there's a silver lining to everything.
Well, that's it.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm an optimist, but that's just kind of how I see things.
Yeah. I was wondering, like, have you had any cryptid experiences?
Not really that I'm aware of. I mean, like I said, there was the thing at the invisible thing shaking the tree, which numerous people suggested could be like an invisible Bigfoot or something like that, but nothing that I'm aware of.
Yeah, neither have I really, besides the flying thing in the air back in 2013 or 2014. Or was it 2015? I don't, somewhere around there.
It all meshes together over time.
Yeah, it does. It really does. I notice, like, the older you get, the less distinct years are from each other.
Yes.
The less distinct times in your life are from each other. Like, when you're a teenager, every year of high school has its own identity. It's totally distinct from the last and the next.
Mm-hmm.
The lines of demarcation are very clear, and it's the same thing in college. But after that, it just becomes a continuous stream.
I think it's just that, when you are a teenager or something, you only have so much life before you.
Yeah.
But the older you get, the more that accumulates, the more little details you start chucking out, so everything starts blending.
Yeah, because the less those details matter anyway.
I mean, I wrote down a lot because when I started writing down not just the weird experiences, but the stuff that was going on, besides that, because that was what I felt like I was supposed to do. And I was kind of like, I don't know why, but now looking back, I'm like, oh, because now here, 20 years later, or 30 years later, I'm going, oh, liminality. That played a big part in all these things. And if I hadn't written down what was going on at the time, I never would have seen it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's things in those notes where I read them and I go, I don't even know what I'm talking about. Like, it's like, oh, went to see this person. Who the hell is that? I'm like,
yeah.
I said them twice and I have no clue who they are.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm significantly younger than you, and even I'm getting to that stage now where I look at like documents I wrote about myself and about my experiences at the time from like maybe 8 or 9 years ago, maybe 12 or 13 years ago. And I'm like, I don't know what half of this shit is. Why did I think to write this down?
I had someone contact me just yesterday, and they were asking me if I had met them briefly back in like 1992, and they were giving me this whole scenario, and I'm looking at it going, I have no idea. Like, I mean, it sounds like it could have been me, but I don't know. And I'm like racking my brain the rest of the night going, it's entirely possible that this happened and I completely forgot and have no memory of it whatsoever.
Do you think you could have a doppelganger or a spirit mimic out there? I'm asking seriously. I know people often use the term doppelganger jokingly, but
I have had 2 doppelganger experiences. One definite one so-so one. Like when I was in junior high, I had been late for school, and when I got to school, I went in to get a pass from the office, and they're like, what do you want? And I'm like, I'm late. And they're like, no, you're not. We've been watching you walk up and down the hallway for the last 2 hours or last hour or whatever. And I'm like, I can guarantee you that wasn't me. And there was no one in the school who looked remotely like me. And they, I'm going to them, you can call my house. I was not here. I was home. So, and they were absolutely certain, down to the way I dress and everything. They were like, that was you, and we both saw you.
And then what's the second one?
The second one is when I went to talk at Fort Fest. I wasn't staying over, but they gave me a room anyway, and that was with Mike Hughes. And Mike got there, and he went to check in, and they said, oh, okay, you're with Seriah. He's already checked in. And Mike went, what? Because this was like on Saturday, and I wasn't coming up till Sunday morning. And he's like, really? And they're like, oh, yeah, and yep, he's already in the room. And so he comes up, and obviously I'm not there, and he messages me. He's like, are you here? And I'm like, no. Why? And I'm like, I'm coming tomorrow. He's like, that's what I thought.
That's very Keelian.
Yeah.
He had a similar experience in Point Pleasant. Well, while he was researching in Point Pleasant, the mistaken identity itself occurred in New York City, I believe. Spirit mimics have always creeped me out. I think they're the one Fortean phenomena that creeps me out the most.
Yeah, I could see that.
And one of the surprising things about them is that they're really underreported. Maybe underreported isn't the right term. They're underexplored. They're underwritten about. The only person I know of who oh, sorry, I have to clear my throat there. Who really supplied any information, any research on them was Steiger, because he was the one who introduced the concept and coined the term. Stories of people seeing other people who look exactly like them. Stories of people claiming that other people saw other people who looked exactly like them and thought it was them.
Right.
he has the one main story in his book Shadow World, which I don't know if you've read that.
I don't think so.
Yeah, where it was like a young couple back in the 1990s, where when the man was gone at work, the woman would receive phone calls from some mysterious source speaking in his voice, imploring her to go meet him somewhere.
Hmm.
And this went on for a couple of nights until finally she caved in and decided to go, meet whoever this imposter was. And she swear to God, there was a man who looked exactly like her partner,
That's weird.
dressed
Yeah.
differently than he was. And then her real boyfriend pulled up in his car, and the thing let out like a high pitched scream and just disappeared into thin air. That is creepy. I looked online, and I have found a few personal anecdotes about that. It was one man who, when he was in junior high, he was waiting for the school bus one morning with his friends in front of a gas station. And for some reason, they were picked up at a gas station. And he saw his mother pull up, or what he thought was his mother. And he called to her, and she just ignored him. It was not his mother.
Hmm.
That's one. There's a number of stories like that. Maybe that's what you experienced.
Maybe.
But
Maybe. Uh,
it's really creepy.
One of the things that would happen early on that I don't have, I didn't take notes on, so I don't know how many times it happened. A few times when I would spend the night down at my friend's house in where that cliff and everything was, I would get phone calls at home from a girl, and my mother never got the name or anything else, and she usually said the connection was bad, but it wasn't someone that she had ever heard the voice of before. And it happened almost every time I stayed away from home.
Was this like what time in your life was this? I assume you were a teenager at the time.
Yeah, 16, 17, 18, somewhere in there.
Okay, so after the hallway doppelganger.
Yes, yes. But
That's
this wasn't so
creepy.
much a doppelganger. It's just I never had any explanation for who was making those calls, and it only happened when I wasn't home.
It could have been it could have been a troll, someone you knew who had access to some equipment that enabled them to do that. It could have had a mundane explanation.
Unlikely. Like I
Yeah,
don't. There was
unlikely, but
no one at
when
the
something
time.
creeps,
What was that?
I was going to say unlikely, but when something creeps me out, I always try to rationalize it. Go on.
It never creeped me out. I wanted to know what it was that was calling the house. And I've had other experiences with phones. Like I've put a phone down to go look at something, and I'll get back and they'll be like, "Who was that?" And I'll be like, "Who was what?" And they'll be like, "I heard a woman say hello." And I've heard that just walking around my house, where every once in a while I'll just hear hello, and I'll be like, "What?" And there's no one here. There would just be me, and it's like, all right, that's the hello voice.
That could be a trickster playing tricks on you, a cosmic trickster, that is, or it could be accidental transmissions from some other place.
Could be, yeah, it could be someone in another world who picked up something from this world and is going hello. You know,
Yeah, someone who in their world is a completely normal person, just like you or I.
exactly.
Although
Uh,
I think I'm stretching the definition of completely normal here with both of us. Uh,
I have,
yeah,
and the other thing I've had on phones is people again when I put phones down or something, someone will say that they hear someone say my name into the phone, and I'll be
that's
like,
strange.
"It wasn't me," you know.
Yeah, I phantom phone calls are an interesting phenomena. I remember one night my cousin and I were driving, and he got a call on his cell phone, and it was from what sounded like a teenage girl or a young woman in her early 20s. It sounded very urgent and very upset, begging for help. like I need to get out of here, or I need something, or I need this, or I need that. This was years ago. I don't remember exactly what.
Yeah.
And then we heard, and there was some kind of fuzz in the background, and then we heard a muffled, like a distant man's voice, and then it just abruptly stopped, all within the space of about 45 seconds.
Wow.
And that could very easily, in fact, that most likely was an actual crime
Mm.
going on, like a kidnapping or something. And she could have misdialed,
Right. Right.
accidentally called his number when she was really trying to call a friend or a relative, or I don't think she would have mistaken his number for 911, but under duress, who knows? Or it could have been a crank call.
Yeah.
That woman and that man could have been laughing at us as soon as the call ended.
Sure.
Their living room or their basement or whatever. Or it could have been, something genuinely anomalous, like that motif of disembodied voices, like screaming in pain or begging for help me.
Yep. Absolutely.
Because those are very common, and he's also experienced that.
Mm.
I've experienced that myself.
I don't think I have. I don't think I've ever heard anyone calling for help.
No, you're not missing anything. I don't think whatever that is really needs help.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's kind of taunting you,
Yeah.
in some way.
I also think this thing responds to how you react to it, and I don't generally react to it with fear. So the way it responds to me generally isn't in scary things. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Like it knows it can't scare you, so it doesn't really try.
Well, if it's partially using our energy and we're putting scary, fear out there, it's I think responding to that. It's using
Yeah.
fear energy or it's using anger energy to manifest. I
It,
think I think there's more than one layer of co-creation going on. I think you have something that's trying to communicate potentially.
yeah.
It's partially using our energy to do it, and at the same time, it also is going to take like we're giving it a form at the same time as it's trying to come through because we have to find a way to see it.
Do you now, like the common theory that's bandied about in paranormal circles is these are basically spirit parasites that feed off negative energy. They scare you deliberately so as to get that hit.
It's possible, or
Burst of negative energy.
it's also possible that negative energy is just easier for us to generate. So if it needs
Yeah.
energy to exist, it's just going, well, just do the scary thing because then we get a burst of energy.
But that would explain a lot. That would explain why so many of these experiences are the same thing. Basically, person wakes up at night, or person lays down, or person happens to be sitting on their couch and they look up and something creepy is standing there and it grins at them eerily, it leers at them, or it kind of growls at them, and they freak out, and then the thing is just gone, never to be seen again. Like a hit and run.
Yeah.
It very rarely do people actually describe being aggressed upon,
Oh
being
yeah.
harmed or injured by these things. It's always just it's there long enough to scare you and then it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And that could explain that.
So going back to the invisible gorilla thing, though, they said that one of the comments, I had made a bunch of notes. They say we experience far less of our visual world than we think we do. Our brains are built to detect patterns automatically. Looking is not the same thing as seeing.
Mm-hmm.
So you could look right at, in this case, the gorilla, and not actually see it because your brain doesn't process it. So looking is necessary for seeing. If you don't look at it, you can't possibly see it, but looking is not sufficient for seeing. Looking at something doesn't guarantee you will notice it. I made a note. There's actually a Bigfoot experiment where they put Bigfoot cutouts along this trail and sent people out looking for Bigfoot. And a lot of them, the Bigfoot would be in an obvious place and people wouldn't see it, which I got to look up more information on. Expectations are based on our prior experiences of the world, and perception builds on that experience. Memory depends both on what actually happened and how we made sense of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that Bigfoot thing is called the Olympic Project.
Now, that's making me think of Where's Waldo?
Yeah.
It's also making me think of the folkloric concept of second sight.
Right.
Perhaps second sight could be explained in scientific terms as a kind of heightened, ultra-focused state with no discrimination, no focus on any one particular thing, and therefore kind of holistic ability to see everything.
Right.
I don't know. That's one thing I do enjoy doing, is not just applying scientific, like physics and neurology-based I'm not going to say understandings or explanations, but frameworks
Mm-hmm.
for this phenomena, but looking at pre-modern, let's just call it pre-modern lore through a modern lens, scientific lens like that. Not in a skeptical way, but just as an explanatory device. I like doing that.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Like the work that Keel did in analyzing the electromagnetic basis, maybe it's not really a basis, but component of the phenomena. The work that Gregory Little did in the 80s and early 90s, bringing plasma to the equation. I think that stuff is important. I think that's necessary. And I consider that a major failure of the Fortean field not to have done that more extensively.
Yeah.
To instead focus almost entirely, as it does, on effects on the percipients, on sociological effects, on finding parallels between things, in history and folklore, in religion, etc., but without actually looking at the mechanics of it. I think that's necessary.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think reality is made up of information. So our brain sorts that information, and it was something like, second sight. I think it's, because things like that have happened to me where I've just known things.
Mm-hmm.
I hate using the word psychic because it has such bad toxic baggage to it.
Yeah, it does.
But I always compare it to, like, okay, I'm sitting in the car with someone, we're driving down the road, they're driving, I'm looking out the side window, and I see a sign that says, rest stop 3 miles ahead, and it's half covered in, trees or something, but it's there. And I look to them and I go, hey, there's a rest stop in 3 miles. And they're like, what? We've never been here. How would you know that? I'm like, there was a sign. They're like, well, I didn't see a sign. And lo and behold, in 3 miles, there's a rest stop. And they're going, how did you know? And I'm like, because it was a damn sign, It's something I noticed that they didn't, for whatever reason.
So, do you see perhaps the Akashic records as a valid concept? Maybe not something that literally exists, but as kind of like a literary metaphor for an information-based reality?
Maybe. I mean, our reality also behaves in a holographic manner, and with holograms, every part contains the whole. So, I mean, it's possible we have access to all this stuff if we knew how to focus on it.
That's interesting. I've read that like in science of perception, there's no actual difference between something you're actually seeing and a hallucination.
Yes. Yeah.
Like the presence or absence of an external stimuli is irrelevant.
Right.
That, which brings us back to, what we were discussing earlier about indirect perception. It's like if nothing is direct, if nothing is really concrete, then how is it that we're all seeing the same things? How does this all hold together? Reality increasingly looks like a house of cards.
But we don't always see the same things. That's the thing. There are many, many times where you ask someone to recount the events and they're completely different.
Yeah, I guess I just meant that in a perfunctory sense.
Yeah, we have a shared reality that a chair is a chair, a table is a table.
Yeah. I mean, when we all experience the same enough of the same things that we can drive on the same road most of the time.
Right.
We can not bump into each other if we happen to pass each other on the sidewalk. So those instances you're referring to where people don't recount things the same way, could you see that as kind of like perceptual glitches, not just signs of like failed memory or inadequate memory on their part, but as actual glitches in the system as a whole?
It could be.
Like pistons not firing?
One of the quotes from that Invisible Gorilla book, when they talk about memory, they said that the vividness of our recollections is tied to how they affect us emotionally. And you find that to be true. But they also say that through their studies, memories accompanied by strong emotions and vivid details are just as likely to be wrong as mundane memories, but you're far less likely to realize it.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's the kind of thing. Like, memories are the best preserved when they are the most emotionally meaningful. That's kind of a common sense thing that you almost don't even need to academicize.
Right, but what they're saying is that they're no more accurate than the ones that are not emotionally charged. They just seem like they are.
That's interesting.
Yeah, they said that, you'll sit there and you'll say, well, no, I definitely remember this because it's so vivid, but it can be just as wrong as any other memory.
That's almost scary.
Yes.
Because, like, if that's the case, then some external agency could easily manipulate your mind, your perception of your own life.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Which makes me think of what I call the Dragon Ball Z experience, which I discussed with Joshua Cutchin on our first episode, where I don't know if you're familiar with the show at all.
I know that it's a show, and that's about it.
Yeah. Okay, I'll just go over in very truncated terms then. In 2007, I rented one of the DVD sets from the public library in my town. I watched a bit of it, and then I lost interest. And then fast forward to 2019. Out of nowhere, I just had the idea, hey, maybe I'll start watching Dragon Ball Z again. It's probably all fresh again by now, for me. But when I started watching it, it was completely different from what I'd remembered.
Right.
And not just in ways that, can be explained by faded memory, because I have an eidetic memory. I have a photographic memory. It turns out my recollection of the show was completely wrong. I had remembered there being major characters that do not actually exist. In the show, the main antagonist, Frieza, I remembered him having an uncle, and I saw this uncle character vividly in my mind. He has no uncle in the show's canon, not even in non-canonical work material. I remembered seeing scenes, entire storylines that did not exist.
Wow.
Just aren't in the show. Even elements, even scenes that were in the series, like the way I remember them was completely different. The camera angles, the situation of various elements, like various scenery things, like a body of water and a bridge in one climactic battle scene that actually wasn't there. One sequence of events I remembered completely different from how it actually happened. It was, and then there were and that's in addition to scenes that didn't happen at all. And then the strangest memory was me looking up DBZ Wiki, the show's online encyclopedia on my cell phone
Mm-hmm.
in 2007. Here's the thing: I didn't own a cell phone in 2007. I didn't own a cell phone until 2015, and yet I had this reasonably vivid memory of looking up that website and reading on it on a phone that I didn't have. And I thought to myself, this can't be explained. This can't be explained just by faulty memory. This is almost like my memory has been tampered with.
Or you lived in a different reality.
Yeah. And it bothered me. It bothered me. So what you're saying really resonates with me. Now it's like, could there be multiple Michael Parishes living in multiple versions of this universe of this world, experiencing things differently? And I got somehow our feeds got
mixed.
crossed. Ugh.
Well, I really like the analogy of this world as a video game.
Yeah.
We're the avatars in the video game because, if you look at us playing the video game from the outside, we're sort of the higher consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes okay, so you're playing a video game, you go, all right, I'm going to watch the walkthrough before I play it. So now your character in the video game, who knows nothing about what's coming, can now anticipate what's coming because you watched the walkthrough.
Yeah.
But he has that avatar has no knowledge. If the avatar had a consciousness, would have no knowledge of why it's doing certain things. It would just do certain things and then be like, wow, it's like I'm psychic. I knew that was coming. And maybe you have, multiple different games running at the same time on the same game. And so you're bringing knowledge from one game over to the other and maybe even confusing the memories once in a while.
It could be. It could be. I'd prefer that to the alternative, which is that some external intelligence went into my mind and hacked my memory.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
For whatever purpose. I don't know why, if it had the ability to do that, why it would choose to affect that one particular
You're right.
important memory. But the idea that there's something out there that has the capacity to do that.
Yeah, I haven't finished the book yet, but one of the things in The Invisible Gorilla that I'm hoping they deal with, and if they don't, I'm actually going to write them about it, is if they've done any studies on people with eidetic memory. Mm-hmm. Because I want to see how that differs from the general studies they've done.
Who wrote this book?
That I don't remember off the top of my head. It's two psychologists.
Okay, do you know when it was published? Because I'm interested in looking into it now myself.
I want to say 2005. It was a bestseller, I think.
Okay.
I think the website is theinvisiblegorilla.com.
Now, could we? I'll check that out after the show. But could we discuss your research history? I guess you could call it.
Sure.
Like when did you start actively reading about and researching Fortean phenomena?
See, it's hard to say because as a kid I was always interested in this stuff.
Yeah.
The book is by Christopher Chabris and Daniel Simmons, and it was published in 2010.
Okay.
So I was always interested in this stuff. When I was a kid, I wanted to be an astronomer to study UFOs. I wanted to be an archaeologist. Well, I wanted to be an archaeologist to be Indiana Jones. But more than that, I also wanted to, find Atlantis and things like that. And eventually it was broken to me that that's not what those people do.
Yeah. Now, this would have been in like the 1970s when movies like Close Encounters of the Third Kind were coming out. And...
Right, yes. I mean, as far as I remember, I was always interested in unexplained phenomena. Like, I loved sci-fi, I loved monster movies and stuff growing up. I mean, the unknown just always fascinated me.
Yeah.
like I said, I don't have a lot of clear memories of the time growing up. I have like little bits and pieces here and there, sometimes disconnected from other things. Um, and I think that's a combination of time and whatever that awakening experience was. Because it seems like after that, I'm like, man, I wish I wrote more stuff down when I was a kid. Because I just don't. It's just blank for the most part. There's been every once in a while I'll remember something and be like, oh my god, I remembered something. I remembered playing, hide and seek with a friend of mine on Long Island when I was like in 4th grade or 5th grade or something like that. I remember the kid liked Mack trucks and we hung out in his basement at least once. Like that popped into my brain once, and I'm like, wow, what a weird memory to suddenly remember. And there's very little detail.
Yeah.
So for a long time, I would read this and that here and there on this stuff. At some point, I got interested in Wicca. And so I started looking into Wicca, and Wicca seemed like it didn't really click with me. Like I liked some of it, but like the thing with Wicca that bugged me was that I liked the idea that it was this ancient religion.
Mm-hmm.
And someone had lent me a book and it's talking about this being an ancient religion. I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. And then I did some actual research and found out, oh no, it's not.
It's a modern construct.
Right. And I was like, oh, and then I started dipping off into other things, eventually settling a little more on Crowley. Crowley really appealed to me. However, ceremonial magic didn't. I don't, because I'm not my brain is just not structured like that. So I started getting into magic and things like that with just a side interest, mostly in UFOs and things like Atlantis and lost civilizations. I lost a lot of that interest at some point on the lost civilization side because I just felt like nothing was happening. Until Robert Schoch did the special on the Sphinx, and then I was all like, ooh, what's this? And then there was no internet at the time. This was like 1992. So like that came and went, and there was still nothing really in the news or anything else. And it was like, oh, it was just kind of a blip until I found Graham Hancock many, many years later and realized that there are people actually working on this in an interesting way. So I leaned more. UFOs were probably the thing I was most interested in. I read John Keel, I read Jacques Vallée, I read Bud Hopkins. And for the most part, and I started realizing at some point, like the magic stuff, I didn't think was ever going to work. Like I just figured this was nonsense. And until I actually tried doing certain things and they had very distinct results. And I was like, oh, this might actually work.
Like, well, what things and what results?
I don't remember because it's too far back. I just remember being surprised that like I would try to do like a ritual for something to happen, and then it would happen, and I'd go, well, it could be a coincidence. And the more I played with it, the more I became convinced that no, it seems to actually relate to what I'm doing. So that was kind of it for a while. When I read The Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot, that kind of started getting me interested in investigating more of how reality works. Kenneth Ring's book, The Omega Project, kind of broke me more than Vallée or Keel ever did, because he's comparing near-death experiences to UFO experiences.
Yeah.
Which don't seem, in my head at that point, those two things seemed like completely different things. But here you had people having a somewhat similar experience, although a little, like the archetype is similar, but the after effects were dead on. And it was like, okay, how is that possible? These are two, interactions with aliens versus dying. Those two things shouldn't fit together. And that's where things started to unravel for me. And the combination of all this got me thinking about like how a lot of the magical stuff kind of connected in with the UFO stuff and everything else. At some point I realized, I'm having these experiences, and especially once I started playing around with magic, it seemed to hype that up a little bit. And these experiences were not that different from what, say, Whitley Strieber was experiencing. I didn't have the abduction element of it, but some of the other stuff he was experiencing was very, very similar. So I started kind of putting those things together and going, why has no one else ever looked at this before? I mean, Keel did to a degree, but Keel was also, this stuff's all demons and stuff. And that I guess just never sat with me right.
Yeah, I've always seen Keel as kind of a crypto Christian, or almost like a crypto, like a crypto Christian, crypto Muslim, crypto monotheist,
Yeah.
crypto person of the book. Because his theory basically is a restatement of Christian and Islamic metaphysics without the overt religious what's the word I'm looking for? Without the overt religious terminology.
Right.
Now, when you say you were having the same kind of experiences as Strieber, you're referring, of course, to the entity communications, to the sleep paralysis episodes,
weird knocking, the things like that. Like I would read something in his book and go, "Whoa!" Like I had this happen, but it had a different face to it.
Yeah.
Like it didn't seem like it was coming from a UFO. It seemed like it was coming from whatever I was trying to interact with.
And once you began performing magic, those experiences intensified?
Yeah. And the way I approached it is I'm not going to do the ceremonial stuff. If this works, the ceremonial stuff shouldn't be necessary.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of like, there's part of this that's working for a reason. I don't know what it is. So I'm going to kind of try and cut it down to the bare minimum and see what works and what doesn't, which essentially became chaos magic. But I didn't know there was such a thing as chaos magic.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, using ideology as a tool, not something you really believe in, just a vehicle.
So I did that for a while. And at a certain point, I got way more into this stuff. Graham Hancock was a big part of that. Plus reading stuff from people like Mac on UFOs, where he's putting it in more of a spiritual light, started me thinking down different paths. And it wasn't probably till shortly before I started Where Did the Road Go, where I started really trying to look at this like, what's actually going on here? And one of the first things it was in one of Strieber's books, I think it was Solving the Communion Enigma, he talks about it. There's a case where this family is standing outside and a fireball goes across the sky very slowly, very weirdly. And just as the fireball is like either going across the sky or just finishes disappearing, their youngest son comes downstairs and says that his brother, who had passed away, had come to see him and let him know that he was fine. And it struck me, and I'm like, okay, nothing about this says aliens.
No.
And and I said, what if? And I think this is where I first came up with the idea, like, what if there's some kind of energy happening right here, and that energy is creating this fireball, this ball of plasma. It's like something coming in from outer space or something coming up from the earth, but it's also enough to alter our consciousness, just enough that this kid who didn't have a lot of walls up because he was a kid was able to communicate with his dead brother.
Or was it actually his dead brother?
Well, yeah, and that's obviously the other question. Was it really his dead brother? But I mean, the point is, I'm thinking that instead of looking at it as, oh, the fireball caused the kid to be able to do this, we may be looking at something that is causing both phenomena. So just like when I was outside, I see the light in the field. Is it that the light in the field is somehow a consciousness creating this experience I'm having, or is that just another side effect of whatever's creating the experience I'm having? So from there, I've been trying to take this stuff apart and find different ways to look at it. And I think the one that strikes people the most is when I suggested that the Bigfoot encounters are basically poltergeist encounters.
Yeah.
Like the wilderness poltergeist concept, which pretty much got Josh and Tim into that, writing that book. That's kind of where it started when I suggested this to them. Because people will go out looking for Bigfoot. They're getting rocks thrown at them. They're getting vocalizations. I mean, this is all poltergeist phenomena to a T. And it's not primate phenomena, but 99% of the time, they're not seeing a creature. And the argument against it is, well, but it's not acting like a ghost. But the poltergeist, I think, comes from our energy.
Okay.
So I don't think a poltergeist is a ghost. I think the poltergeist is a expression of that energy that comes from us. So if we're out looking for Bigfoot, it's going to imitate a primate, not a ghost. And I think especially when you're in a situation where you're amped up because you're out doing a Bigfoot hunt, you're in nature, which a lot of us don't do much anymore, which probably also raises our energy levels.
Mm-hmm.
It might be the prime place for something like that to occur. And especially when you get them in certain locations that there's no way a large primate is surviving in some of these locations where you get regular Bigfoot encounters. So again, maybe there is something in the environment that is striking, that is upping this energy and enabling us to create these encounters.
It could be, but don't poltergeist cases usually involve the presence of an adolescent, usually a girl in puberty, and that's kind of what's fueling it?
Sometimes, yes.
That's the stereotype.
That is the stereotype. Those are the ones that have been studied the most.
Mm-hmm.
However, people who have UFO experiences experience poltergeists. People who have near-death experience poltergeists. I've had tons of poltergeist activity. My co-host Sheryl Lee Black, who's had 3 near-death experiences, has more poltergeist activity than she could deal with. It comes generally from emotional states.
Okay.
So it's just that it's the most obvious, I think, when you have a child doing it. Jenny Ashford wrote a great book on just a collection of poltergeist cases. And yeah, some of them are children, but there's also a lot who are adults.
Mm-hmm.
It can cause any number of different things to happen. I mean, the face of this stuff is very, very different. Louis Proud, before he quit working on this stuff, his last book was suggesting that spontaneous human combustion was a form of poltergeist activity.
Mm-hmm.
That these people were usually depressed and really just didn't want to live anymore, but they're not necessarily the type of people who would have killed themselves. And the fires you get from spontaneous human combustion are not dissimilar to fires that are created by poltergeists.
Now, you didn't tell me earlier you'd had poltergeist phenomena.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's...
Experienced it.
Huh?
Or that you'd experienced it. Our voices are kind of cutting in and out. Could you briefly describe those experiences to me?
The one that I think is the most amusing to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I was about to do a show with Josh and Miguel, maybe. It was one of the roundtable shows for Where Did the Road Go?
Mm-hmm.
And earlier in the day, not too long before this, I walk out of the main room I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
And I would leave the stereo on sort of the metal satellite channel when I wasn't watching something. And a lot of times I'd mute it because it wouldn't be playing stuff I liked, but it was playing something I liked. And so I turned it up a little bit and I'm listening to that. And then like AC/DC or something came on. And I don't like AC/DC, so I muted it. And I walk out of the room and suddenly the stereo turns on and at full volume. And that was really loud for that system. And I'm like, holy crap. And I go running back into the room almost with my fingers in my ears and I mute it. And I'm like, what the hell? And I put it down and I hear this loud bang from the room I just left. And I walk back in and in the middle of the floor is this old, like either a meat grinder or a tomato grinder or something that was my grandmother's that was high up back on a shelf. And it's now in the middle of the floor in this room and it's cast iron. And I'm looking at this like, okay, that's shouldn't be there. And then the stereo cranks up again. And I'm like, seriously? And I walk back in and I mute it. I'm like, I don't like AC/DC. Stop turning the stereo up. And then there was nothing. And so I grabbed the stuff to do the show and I sit down at the microphone and I'm talking to those guys. And all of a sudden they're like, you there? And they can't hear me. And I'm like, what? Yes, I'm still here. And the thing is, my microphone has a physical switch on it. Now, I haven't touched it. And just after a few moments of not knowing why they can't hear me, I touch the switch and the switch is off, and I turn it back on, and I'm like, that was weird. Okay, because I'm sitting right there with my face next to it when it turned off. So we're talking for a few more minutes, and it turns off again. And they're like, you're gone again. I'm like, what the hell? And I look and the switch is off. I'm like, how? I'm right here. So that was it for that night that I was aware of. And this was like a Friday night. Saturday night, I grabbed the case of CDs I normally take with me to the radio station. And it's on the floor on its side. So if you opened it, it would flop open to the side.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a cloth cover on it. I pick it up, the CDs go everywhere because it's open. There's no way I put it down there open because the CDs would have fallen out. It would have to have been opened on the floor on its side. And then that was it. That was the extent of it for that little spurt. Someone pointed out that it was all music related. And I said, well, except for the grinder. They're like, nah, it was a piece of heavy metal.
Why don't you like AC/DC? Off topic, but
they're just boring to me.
Yeah, their songs often tend to lack strong choruses, just kind of monotonous.
I'm very much into stuff that's very experimental, different. Like I love stuff where I'm going, I've never heard a band do this before.
Yeah.
Like there's traditional stuff I like, but AC/DC I don't like. I don't tend to be into the more simple song structures and stuff like that. I came into metal from classical music. So like the thing that got me were bands like Iron Maiden, where I was like, oh, listen to that, you know?
Yeah. That's why like Van Halen, even though their songwriting was actually very mediocre, why they were interesting to listen to because of those oddly structured riffs and leads.
Yeah.
And those odd dynamics, those odd twists and turns in their songs. I've always wondered if there's a musical component to the phenomena, like there's a reason that we like the music we like. If we are experiencers, if that has something to do with our connection to it, to the phenomena, you know, it's really, really far-fetched.
Well, at the same time, though, I think, you know, I mean, metal has always liked those subjects.
Yes.
So, and I feel like music's something that can help you create new pathways in your brain. That's one of the things I like about hearing stuff that doesn't sound like things I've heard before. Like there's a band called Unexpect from Canada. Mm-hmm. And the first time I heard them, I'm just sitting there stunned because they're going in directions I've never heard a band do before. I'm just like, what is this? You know? Or more recently, a band like Zeal and Ardor, who combined like electronica, black metal, and like old time slave chant hymnals.
Yeah. And
it's like, wow, that's different. It does something to my brain.
Yeah, I like for some reason I like abstract noise music.
I can get that.
Like the Italian producer Atrax Morg.
Right.
Doing like what they call power electronics.
Yep.
That stuff really, really engages me psychologically. That almost has a meditative quality to it. Like if you listen to it long enough, you can probably start altering your neural pathways.
Well, that's what I was going to say. That has an almost hypnotic level.
Yeah. Like it's like the flip side to dark ambient.
Yeah. But it doesn't matter. It's the repetition, you know, and the overwhelmingness that's going to affect your brain.
Yeah, similar to tribal ceremonies with frantic drumming and dancing.
Yep.
Which magicians also use. I've read in chaos magic literature where they advocate that quite directly. I was wondering, when you first took an interest in UFOs, what was your initial take on it? Like, which hypothesis did you go for?
I liked Hopkins' work.
Okay, so you were originally an ETH guy?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know people in the UTH camp like to slag him as a nuts and bolts guy, you know, a flesh and blood guy, this guy, that guy. The fact is, he never actually said that they were extraterrestrials.
Hmm.
He never actually speculated as to what they were. He was more focused on the experience itself.
True. True.
And but at the same time, you were reading Keel and Valet, so that would have challenged your earlier assumption. How did the two duke it out in your mind?
I really can't answer that. I know at one point, like I read Dimensions from Valet first. I read Dimensions and Intruders at the same time almost.
Yeah.
And Intruders made sense to me, because if you're looking at it as these things are aliens, you're coming into the equation as these things are aliens. Intruders makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
And Valet doesn't not make sense, but I think what my brain did is, so the aliens were here and pretending to be the Fae. Aliens were here and pretending to create the Fatima thing. It wasn't that I was throwing out the alien thing. I was just putting the alien archetype on all these events.
Yeah. Yeah, it's odd for me because I never bought into the ETH at all. And I think I told you this when I was on Where Did the Road Go months ago, where it was like it was completely new to the subject. I was reading through a generic encyclopedia on it. I came across the entry on John Keel and his theories, even though it was just a brief capsule summary. I read that and boom, it just clicked. I thought, aha, that's what I believe.
Mm. Yes, I do remember you saying that.
I had like no reason to believe that. Like, because I hadn't done any research. I just preferred that instinctually. And here we are.
Well, and I read Keel in Fate magazine for a while before I ever got any of his books. Mm-hmm. Like, it just never occurred to me to look for any of his books. It's like every month there'd be an article from Keel, and it would cover weird Forteana. It wasn't, it didn't go in depth in his theories. So it was probably after that I actually picked up like the Mothman prophecies and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know why. It just never, books weren't, it wasn't as easy to get books back then as it is now.
No.
Now you can pop on Amazon and get damn near anything you want. But back then you had to go find a store that would carry that stuff or could order it.
Mm-hmm.
I remember trying to find Kenneth Grant stuff. And I think I have 4 Kenneth Grant books, I think. And they were all pretty expensive.
Yeah.
They had to be shipped from England,
mm-hmm.
Import it, which, now wouldn't even be like a second thought. But back then I literally found one store locally who could get them. And for the most part, they could, like they got what they could get, and that was it.
Yeah, and mainstream retailers like Barnes and Noble and Borders, usually, they have a paranormal section. They have an anomalous section, usually right next to the New Age section.
Yeah.
But it's always very slim. It's the most obvious mainstream titles. Like at that time, they probably carried a lot of Hopkins.
Probably, yeah. I mean, I found John Mack at a mall, bookstore.
Yeah. Like the Barnes and Noble in my town, if you go to their section, it's Tom DeLonge.
Right. Yeah.
And nothing to take away from him, but there's more to it than Tom DeLonge, I
mean, I think Tom is a genuine guy, but that whole thing is a disinfo campaign.
See, it's just hard for me to take him seriously as a public intellectual. Because I remember Blink-182 when they were in their heyday. I remember him, running naked through the streets in the music video for All the Small Things.
Yeah.
I remember the infantile lyrics and behavior on stage. And it's like, okay, yeah, he's a middle-aged man now, but that was first impressions last forever,
See, I don't have a problem with that because I think you can be completely ridiculous and still smart and serious in other situations,
Yeah, you can. This is just my own experience, my own limitations speaking, because I'm pretty ridiculous myself. But back to bookstores and their inventory habits. Mainstream bookstores are never good. I assume you also read a lot from the library.
Yes. Yeah. And again, that was limited what they could get around here. It wasn't like there wasn't a huge selection. I think when I started looking for Crowley stuff, I think I was able to get his autobiography. And then I was able to get books about Crowley. Like one of his mentors wrote a book, or one of his students wrote a book that was really good. Israel Regarde wrote a book on him I read. And I liked that a lot. That was really informative. But it wasn't like, oh, here's all of Aleister Crowley's books. Just tell us which one you want. It's like, we can get one,
Yeah. Yeah. The library in my town, the occult section is practically non-existent.
Oh, yeah. I don't think there is one in this town, but they had the interlibrary loan thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I went in, at one point and said, okay, what can you get me that talks about Kundalini? And they had to look up and they had no idea what I was saying. I had to spell it out for them. And they're like, well, there's this John White book and Ram Dass, I think, and something else. And I'm like, yeah, give me the John White book.
Yeah. At the one here, they have Keel's Mothman Prophecies, the 2002 reissue for the movie.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
They have, or the last time I checked, they used to have Valet. They used to have like Dimensions and Confrontations. They used to have Fowler's books on the Andreasen saga. They used to have, what was it called? The Watchers. I forget the author, but The Watchers.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And they had Strieber's Communion, and they had, I think the last time I was there was a couple of years ago, and they had the 30 set of the 30 whatever number it was parallel.
No.
And an old encyclopedia from 1980 on the subject, which I remember checking out as a teenager and really enjoying, because they had a lot of creepy stuff on Barker, or not Barker, but Bender.
Oh yeah, yeah.
A lot of obscure stuff in that one. That book they don't have anymore, and I don't think I've been able to find it anywhere else. But yeah, and it seems they also got rid of almost like all the stuff that they'd had years ago. So that's depressing.
And used bookstores used to be a good resource for that stuff too, because it's like, if you know what you want, the internet's awesome. You can go on, you can look up a book and get it. But sometimes I'd walk into a used bookstore and I'd be like, oh, what's this? Like something I've never heard of. And that's how I discovered the Seth material. I bought it for like $1 thinking it would be good for a laugh, because I didn't put any faith in channeled material whatsoever. And that damn near changed my world when I read it. And I'm like, God damn it. Like, I didn't want to believe in this stuff, but this is interesting.
I personally think that channelers are being taken for a ride.
It could be.
I think these things that are speaking through them are cosmic trolls, basically.
Or they're just con artists to begin with.
Yeah, that. Or that.
Seth was different, because Seth actually, there were things in the Seth books that, like, okay, so for example, one of the things that really won me over was Crowley, in talking about magic, would always say, beware lust for results. And that would mean that once you do a ritual or whatever, you should put it out of mind and just let it go, because it needs to kind of like distill into your unconscious.
Yeah, sleight of mind.
Right. And he never really explained he explained what to do as far as putting it out of mind, but he never explained why that worked. And here I am reading Seth Speaks, and Seth's talking about how the way we create our reality doesn't have much to do with our conscious mind, because when things are in our conscious mind, they're not trickling down to the unconscious. It's the stuff that goes in, the symbols that trickle down to our unconscious mind, that allow us to create our reality. And suddenly I looked at that and went, that bastard just described lust for result.
Austin Osman Spare, sigils.
Yeah, exactly.
Which the Chaots, picked up on and developed further. But it is interesting, the power of the subconscious, and how it works through symbols. It's very interesting how, when people are put in hypnotic states, they can be told that, for instance, I'm holding a cigarette lighter to your palm of your hand, and they will feel a burning sensation
Sometimes
on the palm of their hand, as if there was a flame from a lighter being held to it, and there was nothing of the sort there. There was no external stimuli at all.
Right.
So it's been established more or less that the subconscious mind can affect physical reality.
Yep.
If it can affect physical states at someone else's bidding, in the case of hypnosis, then it can also affect the world beyond the individual. And I've always thought that that does play a role in the abduction phenomena.
Well, so the thing about the abduction phenomena is so
Yeah.
much of it's based off of work of people like David Jacobs and Bud Hopkins, and most
Yes.
of that's been retrieved through hypnosis, which in the years since they started doing that, we have learned does not retrieve memories. And what happens is like Jenny Randall's, who I love Jenny Randall's work.
Mhm.
I mean, she's been one of the more on top of things researchers, I think, over the years,
Yeah.
always for new ways of looking at stuff and never getting the credit that she deserves.
Mm-hmm.
Partially probably because she's a woman. But she got herself hypnotized
Mm-hmm.
to find out just how well this would work. And she had an event in her life that there were details about that, like there were people knew about, but she didn't actually remember anything about it other than a few things. So they hypnotically regressed her. She came up with an entire narrative filling in all the stuff she didn't remember. And when they got done and they pulled out, okay, here's what really happened, here's what you remembered, the things she remembered consciously stayed accurate in the hypnosis. Everything else was pure invention. Nothing matched up with what really happened to her. And because hypnosis, especially for things like abductions, are so emotionally powerful, plus the way hypnosis works to begin with, makes these experiences seem realer than real. So they really, when people get out of that hypnotic state and they remember this stuff, they're convinced it's real because it feels so vivid and real to them. And I think what you're having happen is you're having sort of a potentially these things are shamanic awakenings that are being hijacked by people who, are researching UFOs, who are convinced these are aliens doing this, but they're pushing them in the wrong direction.
You think so? You're saying, because I've heard you say this on episodes of your show before, where you've criticized regressive hypnosis, where you've criticized researchers who use it.
Yeah.
But it always seemed to me at the time that you were dismissing the abduction phenomena as a whole.
No. Just the stuff recovered under hypnosis. There are plenty of people who remember this stuff without hypnosis.
Yeah.
There are, and the thing is, like when I had Brent Radens on, he was talking about, I don't remember if it was something Keel wrote about, because I know I've had him on talking about Keel a couple times, but there was someone who, when they put them under hypnosis to remember their experiences, the guy started saying there's a UFO outside right now, and under hypnosis got up, walked outside, and the therapist walked outside with them, and indeed there was a UFO over the building. So was he creating it somehow? Was this UFO something separate from him that was now communicating with him, because hypnosis, among everything else, is an altered state of consciousness?
Mm-hmm.
It could be that some of these abduction accounts are actual experiences while they're in hypnosis,
Yeah.
as opposed to a recovered experience. And there can be value. I mean, Mike Cleland had made the point that he had a past life regression, and he doesn't necessarily believe that that was his past life, but it helped him deal with some stuff in his present life.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, as a therapeutic tool, it's not necessarily a problem. The problem is when someone like David Jacobs gets a hold of it. And he pushes this hostile narrative and actually, in one case, induced schizophrenia in someone to, hide this information from the perceived aliens. And whereas he may have thought he was doing the right thing, the emotional damage he did to this woman was pretty severe.
Yeah. I've never actually read his work. I know he's a big fan of the invasion through infiltration angle.
Yes.
hybridization angle, and that's one thing I've had difficulty with in my own theorizing is how to, I've accepted the UTH, but how do I reconcile hybridization with that? Because abductees have reported seeing, the hybrid infants in the vats of fluid.
Yep. Well, I
They,
mean, it's the modern equivalent of the changeling phenomena.
yeah, so obviously it has some kind of symbolic purpose. Like I for one do not believe that literal extraterrestrials are literally creating hybrid offspring with humans. But then what the hell does that represent? What does that even mean? It could be some symbolic reminder of the phenomena's relationship to us?
Uh, Maybe, yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, or does it represent how it's blending itself with the percipient and
Or the next stage of consciousness, or even evolution eventually for people.
perhaps.
Higher level of something.
But then again, these hybrid descriptions, these have been going on for like decades now, and that has yet to happen. I don't know.
Well, but that may be a long time for us, but maybe not in the grand scheme of things.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it happens in small increments.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's an evolution beyond this world too.
Yeah. Do you think that it's possible there could be like both ETH and UTH like going on at the same time? Like there could be this phenomena, this terrestrial phenomena occurring, and at the same time there could be legit extraterrestrials visiting the planet, and perhaps they themselves are subject to this, and they themselves are experiencing the same phenomena on their planet of origin.
I mean, it's not impossible. I tend to think that if we're experiencing an ATH visitation, we probably wouldn't even recognize it. I mean, it might be something that is so foreign to our concept of life and the way things are. It could be here without us ever even noticing.
Yeah, that's an argument Valet used against the ETH was, well, if they were really from other planets, how would they be cross-fertile with us?
Yeah.
If they were really from other planets, how come they have the same body symmetry, the same morphology?
And why do they behave in similar ways?
Yes. It's, I don't know. Because there's an attitude within the ETH community that it's like, that sees itself as an underdog. You know, like, well, most researchers, they see aliens as flesh and blood beings from other planets piloting nuts and bolts craft for, mundane scientific reasons. But our theories are a bit different. See, we read guys like Keel and Valet, and we think this and that. And, well, we're not quite as popular as those guys are. We still think, and that's not accurate, because the UTH over the last decade or so, and we've discussed this extensively in MRG, it has gradually taken over the Fortean community.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's definitely if not equal to the ETH, it's a close second.
Yeah, it is the new paradigm.
Yeah, absolutely.
So many A-list authors adhere to some version of it now. Nick Redfern.
Yep, but Nick's been there for a while, though.
Yeah. Brad Steiger and Rosemary Ellen Guiley until their deaths.
Yeah, at the end, yeah, definitely.
Timothy Green Beckley is ultimately an agnostic on the subject, but most of the time he seems to err towards it. And then we have, podcasters like you and us and Timothy Renner, etc., writers like Red Pill Junkie, like Mike Cleland, etc. The UTH has really taken off.
See, and I don't know that I even consider myself a UTH guy. I think there's a more spiritual component to it.
Oh, I just meant UTH as in a
other than ETH.
Yeah, as a shape-shifting phenomena of dubious materiality, or of
Okay.
elastic materiality.
Because like when people say, "Oh, these things come from other dimensions," I'm like, "But we don't even know that other dimensions exist. We're replacing like one problem with another problem."
Yeah, and that betrays a fundamental misunderstanding of what a dimension is. A dimension is a measured quantity.
Yeah, and it could be another world,
Yeah.
universe. And I mean, maybe, or it could just be that they're from a different spectrum of light than we are.
Yeah, a dimension is a property of a physical object like length, width,
Right.
things like that.
And
It's not a location you can go to and from. So the phrase interdimensional is pretty meaningless.
well,
Well, the term dimensional, I should say.
the way Keel used it was that, if you're in a two-dimensional world and someone puts their three-dimensional finger down into it, you're not going to see the finger. You're just going to see something appear suddenly in your two-dimensional world. And when they pick the finger up or the pencil up, whatever his analogy was, you're just going to see it disappear
Yeah.
because you can't perceive that other dimension of reality. And maybe that's what's happening. I mean, there's also the people who think of dimensions as like we go through a wormhole or a portal to a different world, an alternate dimension where these things may exist. I mean, we can't say any of that's wrong because we don't know the answers. Like, that's the thing. Like, we can't for sure say that's not possible. It's possible, but we can't go to that any more than we can anything else because we don't know those things exist. Yeah. One of the reasons I started looking at the poltergeist thing so much is because we know poltergeists exist. Like, we have, psi is one of the things we have been able to verify in labs. So it's like I kind of felt like any theory I'm going to come up with should start with psi, and that starts with us. And so then you work outwards. We know we can create energy that alters reality. We know we can create energy that possibly makes it look like there's a separate entity, aka a poltergeist. Now, it's not impossible that also other entities out there see that energy and go, "Oh, I can use that." But we don't necessarily need to jump there yet to say that, this stuff exists and this might be part of the mechanism that creates it.
Yeah. Yeah, I personally think that it doesn't have a set mode. It doesn't have a set source of energy that it works through, that it's defined by physically. It can work with and through a lot of different things, whatever happens to be in the environment, whatever happens to be useful.
Yeah.
If that's electromagnetic fields, it'll use electromagnetic fields. If it's something within the person's own body, it'll work through that. It's a jack of all trades. It's pragmatic.
Right. It sees a certain type of energy, whether it's coming from a person or the environment or whatever, and it can utilize it. If it's an external entity at all.
Yeah. What do you think of star seeds in Indigo Children? What's your take on those?
So Jenny Randalls wrote a good book on that. What it was, hers was Star Children, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, honestly, I identify with a lot of the stuff that's put through in some of that stuff, at least the early stuff. I haven't read anything recently, but I felt like, wow, she's describing, when I read her book, I was like, she's describing a lot of how I grew up. So I don't know. I mean, I don't necessarily know what to think of it. I mean, there could just be some evolutionary components there. There could be some people who are more in touch with certain types of energy than others.
See, the thing is that the concept was introduced back in the 2000s, back when the ETH still held sway, and so everything was interpreted through that lens. And so naturally, these people who had these experiences, who did feel this difference about them, they started defining themselves as part extraterrestrial or extraterrestrial souls in human bodies.
Right.
Because that was the only paradigm available to them. It's the same deal with the RH negative thing, which Joshua and I discussed. It's like, Well, we do know there's a subset of the population, which includes me, that is medically different from others, that has difficulty reproducing with others, that has certain anatomical peculiarities that others don't have,
Right.
et cetera, et cetera. And we know due to the connection between Rh negative blood in the Basque country and connections between Peter Corey's sexual assailant and the Basque country, because the DNA found in the hair, that there's something weird there.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is, again, the predominance of the ETH, everyone filters it through that lens. So it's assumed that RTH people are RT. I'm getting tired. That Rh negatives are hybrids or have been genetically modified by extraterrestrials, or something to do with extraterrestrials. But because I don't believe in extraterrestrials, I don't believe that's the case.
No, there's a lot of more prosaic explanations for that as well, rather than extraterrestrials.
Yeah, personally, I know they get attention in Fortean communities because they have a statistically significant number of experiences, or they have a greater tendency to experience strange things.
Right.
But not every Rh negative does, and not every experiencer is an Rh negative.
Exactly.
It's a large plurality, but it's just a plurality. And I'll finish quick, and then I'll personally, I think Rh negative is a red herring. I think the X factor is something else that is often shows up alongside Rh negative. The two are genetically, or perhaps caused by the same gene or a similar gene.
Yes.
But I don't think Rh negative itself is the thing. I do think the X factor is something else. Sorry, what were you going to say?
First of all, I agree with that. Also, Jenny Randall's published her Star Children book in '95. So again, she was kind of ahead of the curve on that one.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think when you're looking at Rh negative, I think you're probably looking, I mean, we probably have a lot more humanoid ancestors back in time. I mean, we keep finding new ones, but I mean, we know so little about our distant past that I think that is probably another line of lineage that, is almost got wiped out.
Yeah.
And managed to survive. Just, Neanderthal didn't survive, but it interbred with humans, and some of that DNA got into humans, into modern humans. And the same thing may have happened there, that some other line of evolution interbreeded and created this Rh negative. And maybe, genetically, people with Rh negative blood have more propensity to experience this stuff. Maybe I do think there's a genetic component to some of this as well. Like I said, I think there's a color blindness with some people when it comes to this stuff. Like, they literally just can't experience it because their senses don't pick it up.
Yeah, the sensory thing is interesting. I remember Red Pill wrote an article for the Daily Grail. He's basically just reporting on a scientific discovery that exposure to EM fields can temporarily excite the rays and the cones in your eyes.
Really?
Yeah, temporarily enabling you to see broader reaches of the EM spectrum.
Huh.
Now, this was a number of years ago. I copied and pasted it onto a Microsoft Word document, as I do with a lot of articles that I read that are relevant to my research.
Right.
And that's interesting. I also read an interview with Strassman on a DMT site where, he posited basically that DMT can temporarily expand your vision by exciting the rays in your eyes. Huh. Now, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's big. We do know that children and some animals see this stuff easier than we can.
Right.
And it could be attributed to the fact that children have more rays in their eyes.
Well,
which they gradually shed as they age. But do they have really that many more?
I think with children, they're pretty much they learn to block the stuff out.
Yeah.
Our culture is like, nope, that's imaginary, and they go, oh, so I just won't pay it, and eventually their brain just starts ignoring it.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be more of a psychological than a physiological explanation.
The like with near-death experiences, or not near-death, but past life recall, like I said, the hypnosis stuff doesn't interest me. There are aspects of it that do, but for the most part, I don't take it as being utterly valuable because they're probably not real memories. But when you have children who are like under 2, who can give you detailed accounts of their past lives, that's interesting to me. Because oftentimes it's information that they shouldn't even be able to comprehend, much less know about in detail.
Yeah.
So, like, are they picking up on one specific piece of information in the universe, or did they really have this as a past life?
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. What's always interested me is like dogs and cats reacting negatively to something that only they can see.
Yeah.
I've had this myself where, previous cats will come running up the basement steps to the first floor, eyes wide, yowling at the top of their lungs, like, it's urgent. You have to see this. You wouldn't believe what's down there. Or sometimes just staring at the wall, very cautiously, almost intently, with a critical look in their eyes, like they see something and they're not sure they like it, and they're erring on the side that they don't.
Right.
Like they're studying something, like they're sizing something up. I had one cat that did that frequently. And then, of course, dog owners who will go into protector mode. Or dog owners who dogs, remember, I'm tired. Dog owners whose dogs will go into protector mode.
Right.
And they will begin to stare at something that you can't see, and then they will begin to bark at it. Like they're going to attack. But what are they going to attack? That's interesting, and that's long been attributed to animals, is second sight.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, they see more of the spectrum than we do, and they hear more of the spectrum than we do.
Yeah. It's a scientific fact that they have better night vision.
Yeah.
But I've heard it argued that their vision isn't that so superior that they can't see that much more.
But they can see, they can see more. And if this stuff exists partially in like the infrared or whatever, it's possible they could see that easier than we can.
Yeah, like the dog who starts trying to protect his human family from something the human family can't even see.
Right. I had a hypnagogic experience. So when one particular friend would stay over, our energy connected really well, and like weird stuff would happen when I slept. And in this case, it was a hypnagogic thing. Not really. I don't even know if it counts as hypnagogic because it kind of woke me up, where I heard this shriek, and then this loud bang, and I woke up with a start, and I'm like, "What the hell?" And the dog was going crazy. And so I lived in the back of the house, and the dog is just running into the back part of the house, freaking out. And I'm like, what is the dog barking about? Maybe that'll explain the bang. Because, it was loud enough where it felt like it shook everything. And I got up, and I found my mom, and I said, hey, why is the dog going crazy? She's like, I don't know. He just started doing that. I'm like, did you hear a bang or anything? She's like, no. I'm like, okay, so did the dog just hear the same thing that woke me up? Was that not in my head?
Have you ever let me ask you this. I've never had any experiences like that. It was like the experiences I've had with previous cats, and I think I had one with a dog that we had when I was a child. It was always like I was wide awake, and whatever it was, I was already kind of aware of, and whatever, or I saw that they were responding negatively to something, so I got afraid because I was already aware that weird stuff was going on in the house.
Right.
But as far as like the animal connection goes, have you ever had an owl experience, like a Cleland style?
Not really. I mean, I've come across owls, I mean, walking out in my property, but nothing that really. Oh, no, there's one. There's one owl experience.
Go
Like, I've
on.
had a couple weird, like, real life owl experiences, like driving down the highway behind this. What the hell happened? I think I was driving and there was an owl sitting on the side of the road for some reason. And just as I almost came up to it, he took off in flight and I hit him and he just like spun, like his wings totally outspread and he spun off into the air. And I went, what? That was weird. And there was this huge truck behind me. And I'm like, I wonder if the truck saw that, what it looked like. But no, I was talking to Gwendolyn, who's been on the show a bunch of times.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to her on the phone, and we had a very strong energy connection.
Mm-hmm.
And she was in Ohio, and I'm here in New York. And as we're talking, she's outside, and she goes, "Can you hear that?" And I'm like, "I don't hear anything." And she's like, "I don't know what that is." And she said it sounded like a weird horse whinny. And finally, she's like, "I think it's an owl." And it was making sort of a very strange horse whinnying sort of sound.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, you can't hear that? I'm like, nope, I can't hear it. Now I had one earpiece in and one out. I'm like, I don't hear anything. She had it on speakerphone. I wasn't hearing it at all. So a few minutes later, I hear it. And I'm like, oh, there it is. No, I heard it. And she's like, what do you mean you heard it? And I'm like, I just heard the whinny sound. That's weird. She's like, I didn't hear it. And I realize it's coming from outside my window. Neither of us have ever heard that sound before or since. I don't know if she's heard it since, but I haven't heard it since.
Yeah, I've never had like an owl-based experience. It's worth noting that Mike Cleland did not introduce the owl meme or the owl trope. He developed it further than it had been before. But it had been like a minor staple of ufological writing since like the 90s. At the time, owl sightings were interpreted as screen memories.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
But owls, I must say, there is something unnerving about them. To me, just natural owls, because their eyes look very intelligent.
Yes.
Very aware in a way that most animals' eyes just don't. You know, and
their
hooting. Their hooting is very eerie and very keening at night.
Yeah, well, you should hear that thing whinny. It sounds disturbing. I forget what type of owl it is. And actually, while we were filming, I don't remember if it was an owl. I think it was an owl. When we were filming a scene for Gateways to Magonia, the sort of Fortean movie I made, we're standing in the middle of the woods by this these stairs that go up for the walkway, for the trail, and we just hear this beep, 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 and we're like, "What the hell is that?" It sounded like a truck backing up, but we're nowhere near where one of these things would be. And finally, I'm like, nope, I think it's a bird of some sorts. And I think it's an owl that makes that noise. You can actually hear it in the movie for a moment. And in the beginning of the movie, actually, we mentioned like, he's like trying to remember stuff that just happened to him. And he says, there was an owl. And then he just kind of goes on. And this is before Mike Cleland did any of that stuff, because I knew the owl was associated with weirdness. But like most of my owl experiences, aside from that one, have been, sometimes a little odd, but nothing that defies nature,
Yeah, like for me, I used to try to run at night before I discovered the magic of the elliptical machine. And yeah, I'd go out there. It wouldn't be that late. It'd be 10 to 11:30. And there would be an owl in the neighborhood. And keep in mind, it's not that creepy because I don't live in a rural area. I live in a suburb, basically. And I'd just be trying to run down the side of the street, and I'd hear this hooting, and it is just so eerie.
Yeah.
Even though it's a natural animal, and that hoot does not mean anything that should concern you, it's still just an eerie sound. You wish it would go away.
I don't know. I kind of like it. We apparently had a whole host of owls in one of our trees that were also very rare owls.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't find this out until like people kept stopping in front of the house. And finally, my girlfriend at the time goes out there and she's like, "Can I ask you why you're sitting in front of our house?" And they're like, "Oh, you have this rare owl in that tree over there." And we're like, "Oh, that's pretty cool."
Well, what breed? What species of owl were they?
I don't remember. This was quite a few years ago.
The ones we have here are generic barn owls. So let me ask you this: where did the road go? What's the impetus behind the name? What does that mean? Where did the road go?
Well, it just seemed like a good name.
Just a generic kind of represents the weirdness of the phenomena that you're discussing.
So the name, okay, so the short version of this, we were at a wrestling event up in Watertown, northern New York, at some fair. And I knew the people running the event. We went through, we interviewed a bunch of people, like we interviewed Kevin Steen and Mickey James and stuff, because we had access to all these people. And by the time we left, and we knew some of the wrestlers, so by the time we left, the fair that they were having this at was completely closed. Everything was dark. And we had to walk in the dark and figure out where our car was because they were ferrying you from where you parked to the fair. And now that wasn't happening. And we're like, oh, great. So by the time we got to the car and got out, everyone was hungry. Everything's dark. And I'd never been to Watertown before. So we pull up to the light and we're like, all right, well, we know right goes back to the highway. So it's either left or straight. And straight seems like there's a bunch of lights down the hill. So let's go straight. So as we start to go straight, it kind of goes up a little bit and then it dips down suddenly into darkness. And it turned out to be like an industrial park type of place. And the road made almost a 90-degree left, which we didn't see because there were no lights and the headlights were up above it. So by the time we could see, we were on gravel and then grass. And I'm hitting the brakes going, where did the road go? And my friends on the passenger side going, where did the road go? And, like it was just an amusing anecdote. And I mentioned this to a friend of mine later on. And she goes, that should be the memoir for The Last Exit for the Lost. Where did the road go? And I went, oh, that's good, except I'll never do that. And I had a blog up that was on paranormal stuff. It just had a bunch of my writings that I just called like Etheric Paranormal or something like that. And I said, no, I'm going to call that Where Did the Road Go? Because that is a great name for a paranormal blog. And so when I started the podcast, it was just a natural, yeah, that's what I'm calling the podcast. There's no two ways about it. Plus, it comes at the end of or before The Last Exit for the Lost on the radio station. So it's a nice little, matching name that kind of like feel like they go together.
It's kind of like asking or saying, we're not in Kansas anymore.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, Oz factor.
Plus, I'm also, part of my goal is to find new things, to look at this stuff in new ways. So it's not about following the old roads, but making new ones.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect thing to cap tonight's show on, unless you want to continue, unless you have anything more you want to discuss.
Oh, we could go on for hours, but I can always just come back too.
Yeah, given that we have more episodes that we have to do to keep the show going, I think it would be prudent to go that route.
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. This has been tonight's episode of Radio Free Magonia, the official podcast of the Magonian Research Group. I'm your host, Michael Parrish, and I'd like to thank our guest, Seriah, for appearing.
And you can find my stuff at wheredidtheroadgo.com.
Indeed. And we hope you enjoyed listening, and we hope you listen again. Take it easy.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Seriah.